Japan in 1970 to be precise, in the city of Tokyo, which began to be ravaged and destroyed by monster attacks. The mages tried to quell the chaos and fight monsters with their strength, but in fact, they were unable to defeat such powerful monsters. Even the mages were surprised. They had put out all their strength, not even scratching the monster's body, until finally making them realize that it was the end of them, who would definitely lose to those monsters. The monsters tried to attack the mage but were easily countered by a young man. The young man asked all the mages to step back and leave it to him because he would be the one to defeat the monsters. After the mages retreat from there, the greatest mage, who is also known as the founder of magic, namely Ichikami Atsumu, will defeat the monsters. Ichikami is surrounded by monsters, but he can definitely beat them all even though there are so many of them, because they were slow monsters according to him. One day, all over the world, large numbers of monsters suddenly started appearing. The event became known as the catastrophe. Humanity's weapons were completely ineffective against the monster. Humanity, is starting to open its eyes to the possibilities of magic. After that, magic became the only thing that could beat those monsters. The battle between monsters and humans continued for a decade. Then at this point, for the first and most powerful magician, Ichikami Atsumu, no one but him can save the world. Then while fighting those monsters, there was a girl who was none other than the demon god, the top-ranking monster boss of Calamity. Has enormous magic power and pressure, even though his whole body was slashed. The monster was suddenly in front of Ichikami and unleashed its level 14 power, making Ichikami immediately awake and protecting himself with a mana barrier. The monster used its full strength right at the start. Shortly after that, the monster attacked again with 6 combined magic elements, which directly attacked Ichikami's body so that he had to defend himself with such a strong defense. After surviving, the huge flames also attacked Ichikami's body until he fell from a great height. Luckily, he was still able to survive even with his body starting to hurt. The god demon dismounted and approached Ichikami. Seeing that, Ichikami started to think it was the power of a demon god beast that was so strong. Ichikami started to give up, and it seemed that from then on he would have no chance of winning. And it seemed he had no other choice, since magic power was determined by rank and the number of magic circles was what determined the magic rank. The highest demon god rank could reach 14th rank, and Ichikami's limit was also 14th. Then with 14th rank pure void magic, he released power along with the monster attacking him. However, the monster immediately lost and disappeared. Ichikami was thrown on dry land, which was lit by the bright sun against the blue sky. Ichikami Atsumu had defeated the boss, and with that surely the disaster could end, but he had used all of his magic. This young witch lay helpless. He thought, to die as a great sage, that wouldn't be a bad thing either. Moreover, he has lived a good life. After that, Ichikami Atsumu closed his eyes and his soul rose to the sky and then penetrated the hospital and entered the body of a young man. The young man was slowly able to move his body, then woke up instantly, and he realized that he was alive. Ichikami couldn't believe that he was alive again. Even though he had used all of his magic, it felt impossible, and impossible especially when he looked in the mirror. He saw the shadow of a completely unfamiliar person. A new character named Kusanagi Minato. A doctor and nurse opened the door and greeted me, while Ichikami was still in front of the mirror. The bandages that covered a quarter of Ichikami's body began to be removed by doctors who couldn't believe it. Ichikami was unconscious and in critical condition due to an accident, but now he has fully recovered. He seemed to be healed by holy magic. Hearing that, Kusanagi started to think that it was true that his body healed him automatically with holy magic, and he just found out that he had an accident. Then Ichikami asked if his magic power had run out. Doctors and nurses were also confused. Then they asked in return for the power of magic. What does Ichikami mean? Ichikami said that during the big disaster, he was fighting monsters. Hearing that, the doctor even asked, "What is your name and what year is it now?" Our Ikai replied that his name was Ichikami Minato and now it should be 1970, right? Hearing that, the doctor speculated that it might be a sequela, or what is commonly referred to as a residual symptom of an accident. It seems to be a case of memory impairment. Then the doctor told me that his name was Kusanagi Minato and it was already 2022, not 1970. Ichikami couldn't believe what the doctor said, especially when he found out that the body used at that time was named Kusanagi Minato. Plus now he's living in 2022, which is several tens of years from his past life. Ichikami isn't convinced by the doctors and nurses and instead thinks they sound like they're lying. But right after he saw the thin TV and clear picture, the calendar also showed the year 2022. After that, he saw a small object held by the nurse that he had never seen before. It was actually an iPad. Then he began to think about what the future really is. Then the doctor said that the great disaster that Ichikami mentioned happened 50 years ago and has not happened since then. Then Ichikami asked that big disasters not happen again. Since then, what about the monsters? The doctor replied, there are monsters, but not many. Now it's peaceful. Hearing that, Ichikami thought if it was true then the world would be at peace. He was very grateful. The doctor continued, the figure named Ichikami Minato, whom he meant had died during a major disaster 50 years ago, he sacrificed himself to save the world. Therefore, the figure sitting in front of him now is definitely not Ichikami Minato. Ichikami realized that at that moment, he really had died. Then he reincarnated into Kusanagi Minato. Not sure how that could happen though. A few weeks later, Ichikami, or now we call it Kusanagi, has been released from the hospital and returned to his apartment. He looked around the place, including the room that Kusanagi used. Then he saw a note that his parents had died when he was young. He was kicked out by his foster parents and sent to a boarding school. Since then, he has survived on his parents' inheritance. Kusanagi then lay down on the bed while looking at the note from earlier. He thought that in that world there is no such thing as reincarnation magic. So did his reincarnation happens because of God, or just a coincidence? Then he looked at Kusanagi Minato's Magic Academy student card, where he attended the Magic Academy. In ancient times there was no reason to establish a Magic Academy. Kusanagi felt that it seemed quite interesting. Then Kusanagi realized that his cell phone was ringing. Then he opened it and didn't know who was calling him because he definitely didn't know him. Apart from that, he was also confused about what he was holding and what he should do. He kept watching him. Feeling that he didn't care, Kusanagi threw the cell phone onto the bed. The next day, Kusanagi goes to school and sees Kamui's Magic Academy. He was quite happy to be able to go to school when he was an adult, making his heart beat so fast. Kusanagi initially thought that it was pretty good, but after he looked around he wasn't sure what magic those students were using. Moreover, what kind of magic power is that? Why is it so disappointing in Kusanagi's eyes? Kusanagi couldn't believe it and thought that all the techniques and movements were incorrect. Compared to the rookie wizards of his era, the strength of the apprentices of this era is only 1/10 of the rookies. Will they succeed in becoming wizards? Or what happened there because of the drunkenness of peace? However, if magic decreased drastically, it must be because the world was at peace. Kusanagi entered his class and sat on a chair. He felt nostalgic, and he was very happy. Then he asked, "Do you have friends?" While thinking like that, 3 youths with grim faces stood in front of Kusanagi and asked why he had ignored his message. Even though he's just a Kusanagi. Kusanagi looked casually at them and even asked who they were. One of them got angry and kicked the table that Kusanagi was using. The young man angrily said, "How dare you forget Tadano-jun?" After that, Kusanagi remembered that Tadano was the one who contacted him yesterday and instead assumed that he was best friend. Tadano was happy that Kusanagi could finally remember, so he stretched out his hand and asked as a friend if Kusanagi should know what he was doing. Hearing this, Kusanagi even held Tadano's hand tightly and said that as a friend, you have to get to know each other better. Tadano pulled his hand hard and said if that wasn't what he meant, he didn't want to get intimate with Kusanagi, but he wanted to ask for money. Tadano wants Kusanagi to give him money. Tadano grabbed Kusanagi's shirt collar and tie. He said again if Kusanagi didn't still have a lot of money inherited from his parents. Seeing this, he realized that actually Kusanagi Minato was being bullied. Meanwhile, Tadano, who saw Kusanagi's arrogant level, didn't like it, and he threw a punch but stopped when a short-haired girl greeted him as he entered the classroom. Tadano was fascinated by the girl, then released his grip and said that Kusanagi must not forget what he was asked earlier. Tadano and his 2 friends walked away from there. Then the lesson begins. The history teacher explained the day's lesson regarding major disasters. The final catastrophe, otherwise known as the Great Catastrophe. At that time, monsters from all over the world came and made humans desperate. However, the pioneer magic summoned by the great sage named Ichikami Minato had different thoughts. He did not give up and defeated all the monsters alone. And in the end, he faced the Calamity boss, the demon god whom he defeated by sacrificing himself. Since then, major disasters have never happened again. After that, the teacher asked who Ichikami Minato was. A beautiful girl who previously helped Kusanagi, namely Mizuha, raised her hand and answered the teacher's question. Mizuha replies that Ichikami was the only survivor of the first disaster and the first magician, as well as the reason why the Kamui Magic Academy was founded. He is the hero of the world and the idol of all magicians. The teacher added that he was the only survivor of the first disaster and the first human to use magic. The Magic Academy was founded to produce many magicians like Ichikami Minato. He is the greatest wizard in human history, and that lesson will be included in the exam. Hearing that, Kusanaga's body shook in his seat. Kusanagi, even though not anymore, he wished they could stop all that because he was so embarrassed. He didn't expect that he would be tortured like that. He shouldn't have gone to school earlier. However, as the doctor said, the world is at peace. Is it possible because of that? That causes witches to become weak. If you look back at it, the world was indeed very peaceful, even very peaceful. It was so peaceful that he could enjoy the cool air and the reassuring blue sky. He could see it from behind the glass window of his classroom. Not long after, the teacher ended the class, and before leaving he said that tomorrow there would be an assessment of the student's magical power. Then Tadano and his two comrades approached Kusanagi's desk again and said that Kusanagi should have heard that tomorrow there would be a magic power assessment. It seems like it will be fun to see the lousy power of Kusanagi magic. Hearing that, Kusanagi even thought, can Tadano keep quiet? There was no use at all for the young man to be there. After that, Kusanagi took his bag and walked away from there. Even so, Tadano said that Kusanagi's parents also did not have magic powers, and it was certain that Kusanagi was a lousy orphan. Then Tadano and his two friends laughed about it with such satisfaction. Kusanagi suddenly stops and mentions Tadano as a stupid boy. Tadano, who heard this, clearly didn't accept it and told Kusanagi that he shouldn't be arrogant. Tadano then took out a magic circle and cast his magic in the classroom, making the students shocked and didn't believe it. Moreover, Tadano didn't seem to hesitate to use magic in the classroom. Then Tadano directed his fire magic towards Kusanagi, who was just silent. Mizuha was moved to run toward Kusanagi and said that it was dangerous to protect him. But she was too late because the magic had already hit Kusanagi's body. Seeing the magic that hit Kusanagi's body and caused an explosion in the classroom, Mizuha, annoyed, said that Tadano shouldn't use his magic power in the classroom because someone could get hurt. Tadano didn't accept being reprimanded by Mizuha and argued that it was Kusanagi who tried to fight him the first time, so it wasn't his fault. After that, the flames of the explosion went out and the smoke started to blow away. Kusanagi stood firmly without the slightest injury, not even his clothes were scratched. This surprised his friends, including Mizuha and Tadano. Kusanagi said if the attack hit him. Tadano couldn't believe that Kusanagi wasn't injured after taking his direct hit. Tadano was shocked, confused, and wondered what really happened. Meanwhile, Kusanagi thought that if it was level 1 magic, he could block it with a magical barrier. He didn't need to use his magic directly. Kusanagi understands that he is a good boy, but Tadano needs to be punished. An aura of magic came out of Kusanagi's body, which made Tadano and his two friends start to get confused and frightened by it. Instantly, Kusanaga's body emitted a bright light that even his classmates couldn't believe it. Some of them even felt unable to move. They didn't know what was happening. Mizuha herself wasn't sure what magic it was. Kusanagi walked up to Tadano, who was starting to shake with Kusanagi's change. Kusanagi tried to reach Tadano's body, but the door was suddenly opened by a teacher. The teacher asked what really happened. Did someone use magic in the classroom? Hearing that, Kusanagi exhaled and replied that nothing happened in the class, and the possibility of someone using magic outside of class. The teacher said that there were no club activities going on the school grounds. It's possible that there are students who are outside the school area using magic arbitrarily. Witches are usually very interested in using their magic. Then after that, the teacher asked what about the smoke. Kusanagi replied that maybe it was the smoke coming from outside. The male teacher immediately believed, because if it was a Kusanagi who said that, then it must be true. Then the master said if he would look for the culprit, then asked them all to return to their respective seats. Kusanagi flashed a smile. Then he thought of apologizing for the trouble. Maybe he would fabricate fake evidence to get the matter resolved quickly. Mizuha and the other friends started having doubts, while Tadano was annoyed with Kusanagi and couldn't accept what was happening, then walked away from there. Kusanagi always thought again that even though they were just students, their magic level was still too low. Will they be able to beat the monsters? Even if there's no disaster, there's still a possibility of monsters roaming around. And he'd better Kusanagi start looking into that. At night in Shibuya Old Town, Kusanagi checks the place thereafter, noticing that Shibuya has changed a lot. Some places are damaged and neglected as if hit by a disaster. However, Kusanagi didn't sense any monsters around. Everything might have fallen apart, but it looks like the police have finished them all off. However, after he had continued walking there for a while, he could feel the aura of a monster from a great distance. And also there are humans there. Kusanagi quickly went towards that place with the help of his magic. Meanwhile, in a different place Kusanagi was going, a young woman was surrounded by several monsters. She looked very scared and also cried because she didn't know what to do. The monsters seemed about to start attacking, but luckily the Kusanagi had gotten there with lightning speed. He faced the monster and defeated it easily. Kusanagi glanced at the young woman from the badge on her chest, indicating that she was a police mage. Then he told the young woman to be careful next time. The young woman said thank you for the help that Kusanagi has given. But Kusanagi didn't answer, and with full force, he left. The young woman is actually curious about the person she just met. If you look around like a great wizard, she had just realized that even Kusanagi didn't cast any spells when attacking monsters, which indicated that Kusanagi was indeed a great magician who was in a different class from them. Meanwhile, Kusanagi had left there and he felt grateful because he had hidden his face earlier. Since he had just been reincarnated, he didn't want to stand out. But come to think of it, the young woman just now had almost been killed by a low-level monster. Kusanagi was a little disappointed realizing the level of the magic police had dropped so much. From the looks of it, there was no doubt that people in this era couldn't possibly defeat monsters. Not only the students but also the police. The magicians in this era have become very weak. Apparently, even the people of this era still need his strength. After that, the Kusanagi kept jumping away with magic, thinking he would finish off all the monsters in the vicinity first for now. A teacher in front of a tool said that day they would measure the magic power of the students, and asked them to make sure to get their number and attributes that day. That was the most important thing if they hoped to become professional magicians. Meanwhile, Kusanagi thought he couldn't measure his power without using an object. But he tried to ignore those students, but even the teachers didn't know something very basic. Though magic perception is the cornerstone of magic, then Mizuha asked Kusanagi was it the right time, while the others were even excited because Kusanagi and Mizuha were talking to each other. Being spoken to by Mizuha was something extraordinary. Mizuha then said that it was the first time they had spoken. Then she introduced herself that she was the second daughter of the Mizuha magic noble family, namely Mizuha Yuika. Hearing that Kusanagi even asked, "What is a noble?" Mizuha was annoyed that Kusanagi didn't know about it, even though the nobles were those who came from the leaders of the four noble families, the chief magicians. No wonder Kusanagi didn't know because back then that didn't exist and he had never heard of the Mizuha family. After Kusanagi saw that Mizuha's magic power wasn't that strong for a famous magician family, their power was very weak. Meanwhile, Mizuha wasn't sure what she saw in Kusanagi. Even though she had been so generous to talk to Kusanagi, Kusanagi should be happy now. Meanwhile, Tadano is annoyed to see Kusanagi and Mizuha talking to each other and he doesn't like it. Then Kusanagi asked, so what does a magic noble have to do with him? Hearing that question, Mizuha became a little irritated. Then she also tried to take a deep breath and calm herself down. Then Mizuha thought that she was a noble's daughter who had to maintain her dignity. She can't look bad. After that, Mizuha felt that there was something strange about Kusanagi because when she was attacked with magic yesterday, she wasn't hurt at all. And there must be a reason behind it. Then Mizuha started to talk about yesterday, but her words weren't finished when the teacher asked the students who were behind to get ready. Kusanagi, who heard that, was very happy because it was time to measure his magic power. After that, he left from there. While Mizuha thought it was a good thing, she would show her true strength after the examination. Tadano's turn started to measure. He put his hand on the tool and his magic power was 1000, while his magic attribute was fire. Tadano felt good because it was better than before. Kusanagi, who saw that, started thinking, if it's 1000, then the standard of measurement hasn't changed for 50 years. After that, it was Mizuha Yuika who was summoned. She has 2000 magic power and her attribute is water. The other students thought it was cool and said that Mizuha and Tadano's magic power was the highest magic power for that year's class, and they would become great magicians. Some of them were as expected of Tadano, the gifted fire magician. And Mizuha is cool too. Kusanagi thought that maybe it was just a joke since Mizuha excelled at only 2000. She was no better than an amateur. Meanwhile, Mizuha starts to look arrogant and thinks that is the true power of the Mizuha family. In a place that was a little away, Kusanagi saw a happy face from Mizuha, and here Kusanagi wondered why she looked so proud, and she shouldn't have seen Kusanagi with that face. And it is unbearable. The next name that was called was Kusanagi Minato. After Kusanagi's name was called, his other friends talked about it, because in the past he got the lowest level of magic and no attributes. He was indeed good at studying, but his talent in magic was lacking. Tadano also thought that Kusanagi had no talent for magic. That is very embarrassing. Meanwhile, Mizuha wanted to see how great the magic ability Kusanagi had. Mizuha believes Kusanagi can't beat her. Kusanagi was already standing in front of the magic measuring device and he didn't know what to do. Because back when he stood out the most, it was troublesome. Should he hold back a little? Then Kusanagi put his hand in front of the tool. Instantly the tool gave off a magic aura like lightning because Kusanagi thought she wouldn't hold back. If that device could measure the power of a high mage, then why didn't he give it a try? Then it continued to give off an overwhelming magic aura until it was visible from the building where they were trying to measure strength. Everyone present looked confused because the power was so great that it exploded and shattered. Kusanagi did not expect that his tool would be destroyed just because he was a little serious. No one there could feel the power of his magic. Do those people deserve to be witches? After the magic meter exploded and destroyed the entire room, some of the students were even hit by the fragments. The master asked if they were okay. They say if there is no problem and they are all good. After that, he asked Kusanagi the same thing. The teacher said that it was the first time for him to see the magic meter shatter like that, and began to ask what the tool notes were. That's not good according to the teacher, especially now that they won't know the magic power and attributes of the Kusanagi. Kusanagi asked if it was bad. The master replied that they divided the students into groups according to their type. They planned to split the group after seeing his results, but since the tools were destroyed it couldn't be done. Then the teacher called Tadano and asked him if he could include Kusanagi in his group. Tadano, who heard this, was silent for a moment, then smiled evilly. Then he said of course he would accept Kusanagi into his group. The teacher said it was very good, and because of Tadano he felt very calm. Tadano approached Kusanagi and said he was looking forward to it. In the old city of Shibuya, Kusanagi and other friends were guided by a teacher at that time walking the streets of Shibuya, where there are many monsters still occupying places that have been repeatedly destroyed by great disasters. And periodically the wizards and police vanquish the monsters there, so the students of the academy are also required to help out. Since most of the monsters had been subdued by professional magicians, students didn't need to worry about high-level monsters. Kusanagi thought that he didn't expect a practical class. Even the students would be able to defeat monsters. They will also work in groups. Didn't he come there last night? But in that place, there was something strange. He was sure he had defeated all the monsters, but he could still sense the presence of a few more. There was no sign of disaster there. So what? Why are there still monsters appearing there? Some of their students wanted to do sparring and other games. Kusanagi found it strange that it was a practicum class, but they were very relaxed. Not long after, the teacher said that the practical class would start in a moment, and asked them to make sure to work as a team. Tadano called out to Kusanagi, after which he pushed him against the wall. He then told Kusanagi that it would be better if he didn't bother them and stayed there. Kusanagi shook off his clothes soiled with dust. She said that she had been kind to Tadano and the others, and asked them not to get carried away or she would run out of patience. Kusanagi said he wouldn't go easy on them then. If Tadano didn't like it, he could ignore it. Tadano pointed at Kusanagi irritably and said that it was better for Kusanagi not to talk to him since he was a lowly person. Tadano thought, even though Kusanagi is trash, why is Mizuha so attracted to him? Kusanagi didn't understand Tadano's meaning, so she concluded that maybe Tadano likes Mizuha. Tadano got even more irritated and started to get angry at Kusanagi. Then he cast his magic to attack Kusanagi, but Kusanagi prevented him. Tadano said that there was no point in apologizing now. However, Kusanagi asked Tadano to look behind him. Tadano said he would not fall for his cheap, childish tricks. Then they looked back and saw that there was a monster that was so terrible and scary. They were scared and couldn't believe how there could be a demon army there. Two of Tadano's friends then asked Tadano's help to fight the terrible monster. Tadano arrogantly said that if of course he was going to fight that monster, he would be able to win. It was light work for him. Then he cast his fire magic and mustered to attack the monster with all his strength. After that, he thought that the job was done. However, it turned out to be wrong, as the monster didn't even have a scratch on it. Not defeated because the demon army cannot be defeated with only Tadano's level 1 magic. The three of them started to freak out, unable to do anything else. The monster was standing right in front of the three of them, who were already trembling and sat on the ground. Tadano cried and was sure that he would surely die there. The monster pointed its claws intending to attack Tadano, but it watched Kusanagi with its threatening aura, then soon retreated backward. Kusanagi walked up to the monster and said even the demon army could tell that. Kusanagi released his powerful magic aura and surrounded the demon army with a magic circle. Tadano and the others said that the Kusanagi wouldn't be able to defeat the monster with level 1 magic and they would die there. Kusanagi cast a level 2 magic, break magic, which immediately hit the monster, after which she cast a level 1 magic, fire arrow, to strengthen the previous attack. The magic instantly burned and destroyed the monster's body. Tadano couldn't believe what he just saw. Had Kusanagi killed the monster soldiers? It's impossible. How could someone like Kusanagi do it? Kusanagi herself thought if it was level 1 of hers, it could kill the demon army. It was strange for the demon army to be in Shibuya. He killed every monster yesterday, but their reappearing was also very strange. Is that a bad sign? Was the situation worse than he thought? Even if a great disaster were to happen again, he would save everyone he promised. Meanwhile, Tadano's two friends still can't believe that the Kusanagi they know defeated the monster. Tadano himself doesn't like that. Tadano hit the wall in frustration. Behind the wall of one of the buildings, it turns out that there is also Mizuha, who has seen what happened there. This girl looks very shocked after seeing the magic power of Kusanagi. Mizuha casts level 1 magic, Aqua Saucer, to defeat the monsters. Some of his team members were amazed by that. Mizuha then realized something like that shocked those ordinary people who were completely useless. Since she was a genius, it couldn't be helped, and Mizuha felt proud of it. After that, Mizuha saw Kusanagi, Tadano, and his two friends from a distance. Then she started to follow them. She felt like Kusanagi was being bullied and she couldn't miss it. It was from there that Mizuha peeked at Kusanagi, Tadano, and friends who were facing the demon army, and it's not something they can overcome. Even she intended to help them because she was a member of the Mizuha family. Mizuha tried to get closer and asked them all to run, but before all those words had left her mouth, The demon soldier had been defeated by Kusanagi. Mizuha, who was back behind the wall, couldn't believe it, and what made her even more unbelievable was that it was Kusanagi's magic. She remembered that Kusanagi used to be very shy and not talented in magic, but now it was as if Kusanagi was a different person. Mizuha didn't even hear any incantations memorized. Magic without chanting was a strange thing. Moreover, how could Kusanagi beat a demon with level 1 magic? That's how their ranking was created. Magical Beast, Rank 6, Demon Soldier, Rank 5, Demon Captain, Rank 4, Demon General, Rank 3, Demon King Rank 2, and Demon God Rank 1. The effectiveness ranking for each demon has remained common knowledge for modern wizards. Mizuha thought the witches needed to be at least level 3 to be able to defeat the demon army. It was impossible to defeat him with only level 1 magic. After that, she even asked herself, why was he hiding there? Kusanagi noticed that Mizuha had been peeking earlier, so she said that peeking was a good hobby to have. Mizuha was surprised when Kusanagi knew that she was there all along. Then she asked how did Kusanagi know that? Kusanagi replied that if Mizuha was a witch, of course, Kusanagi would know that. After that, Mizuha came out from there and Kusanagi continued his words. They can't feel magic, right? After that, Kusanagi walked away from there. Mizuha tried to stop him and chase him. She asked Kusanagi to explain what just happened. Mizuha tries to chase Kusanagi into a different alley and suddenly Kusanagi disappears, and Mizuha is confused by that. Though Kusanagi is on top of the building, he found it pathetic. Then Kusanagi checked the place around there just in case. With his magic, she could detect the surroundings where all the demon soldiers had perished, but there were quite a few magical creatures there. Even Tadano, who was called the best student, did that. The other students might have a hard time fighting the magical beasts, and maybe he should reduce some of them. Its range covers the area around Shibuya Station. Then with a magic circle, magic level 2 magic Barret, he cast his magic all around the area. Some of the other friends thought that it was something strange like a shooting star, while Mizuha knew that it was magic or rather multiple magic abilities. In a different place, the team from Mizuha had a hard time because they were blocked by several magical creatures. After all, there were too many of them, and they couldn't beat the monsters. The monsters tried to attack the two of them, but because of the magic that was released by the Kusanagi, the monsters quickly lost. Kusanagi, who saw that his magic could kill monsters, found it very enjoyable and for killing them all precisely. But after seeing it, he felt that it seemed he had overkill in killing those monsters, even though he did kill them all in the end. Because he had killed all the monsters, now it seemed like everything would be boring. At this point, Kusanagi thought he should be able to hold himself back. Kusanagi wandered around the area. He thought it should be fine around there. He shouldn't need to hide his strength, but he didn't want to stand out too much, otherwise it would be too much trouble. Kusanagi arrived at the place where the other students saw the phenomenon of the sudden death of the monsters earlier, including there was also a teacher who didn't know what was going on. Then the teacher asked how there are still magic creatures left. They should have been conquered, and they were all defeated with just one strike. It was done by a very skilled person. The teacher realized that just now was null attribute magic, namely firing countless magic bullets. He had never seen anything like it before. Without magic, it would be a problem. If it fired 2 of those bullets, then no big deal, but if it was above 6 bullets, it was not the students' doing. The students started to get worried and confused. They even asked why there were so many magical creatures that appeared, because they almost died. The master apologized for that. He later said that he had been informed that the police had released almost all of them. He should have also confirmed from the school side. He was truly sorry for putting them in danger. Then one of the students who were there asked if someone had come to help them earlier. The teacher replied that he did not know. The master still thought it might have been a police officer or a legal wizard, might as well have been a dark wizard, but it was a fact that he saved them all. He thanked the unknown wizard master. Then the other students started talking about that amazing magic they were curious about. Meanwhile, Kusanagi thought everything seemed fine, even for everyone. Mizuha's mind was still racing about Kusanagi, where she defeated the demon army with level 1 magic. This girl thought the possibilities of magic were limitless, was Kusanagi's doing too. The fire attribute and null were 2 unique magic attributes, so no student would be able to use the 2 attributes even for that person. She then thought too much because he couldn't be able to use 2 attributes. The null attribute magic user must be someone else. But it is a fact that Kusanagi has defeated the demon army. Mizuha started to think about who the real Kusanagi was. Tadano's 2 friends started arguing that it seemed about Kusanagi who threw the laser magic. The others found it impossible, even though Kusanagi managed to defeat the demon army. Tadano didn't like what the 2 were saying and asked them to be quiet, otherwise he would kill them both. Even though he couldn't believe that Kusanagi was so strong, because something fishy is going on. They also felt it was a strange thing because all this time they knew that Kusanagi was just a coward. They were sure that Kusanagi was playing dirty. Tadano felt fooled. He didn't accept that he would make Kusanagi show his true nature. Sometime later, during after-school hours, Kusanagi was leisurely returning home from school when suddenly he was attacked by Tadano and several other male students. Tadano said that he was waiting for Kusanagi. Kusanagi, who heard that, said they all never give up. Wouldn't their free time be better spent studying magic? Hearing Kusanagi's too relaxed answer irritated Tadano because it should have been Kusanagi who had cheated. Kusanagi didn't understand what cheating meant. Tadano angrily asked Kusanagi not to act stupid. There was no way she could use magic like that, and he had used a trick. Seeing Tadano's attitude, Kusanagi was sure that they didn't want to hear his explanation. After that, Tadano asked Kusanagi to come with him. Then Tadano said that he saluted Kusanagi for not running away. Kusanagi said casually that there was no reason for him to run away. Tadano was again irritated at Kusanagi's calm demeanor. He then asked Kusanagi to stop talking nonsense. After that, he told Kusanagi that he couldn't use magic there. Tadano and his friends then took turns beating Kusanagi with all their might. Tadano was happy with that because, of course, Kusanagi couldn't do anything without his magic. Even if Kusanagi begged, he wouldn't stop and forgive him. Meanwhile, Kusanagi thought that let alone hurt him, it didn't even scratch his body at all, because his magic power automatically protects him. Even if they hit him, it wouldn't have any effect. That's annoying. Maybe he should pretend he got hit. Then someone shouted at the crowd and asked them to stop. The one who dared to shout at the school delinquents was none other than Mizuha. Tadano couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mizuha once again protects Kusanagi. It was obvious that this would irritate Tadano even more. Tadano was shocked to see that stopping him was Yuika, the girl he wanted. Tadano nervously said nothing had happened, and they were just playing together. Yuika loudly said that she knew they were all bullying Kusanagi. Yuika couldn't believe Magic Academy students were bullying other people. Yuika dared to ask if Tadano and his comrades felt ashamed of themselves. Instantly, Tadano and his friends took a few steps back at the words of kicking Yuika. In his heart, Tadano even blamed Kusanagi. He thought Yuika's attitude of disgust towards him now was because of Kusanagi. Paying no heed to the others, Yuika grabbed Kusanaga's arm and led him away from that place. Seeing the two of them holding hands made Tadano immediately dumbfounded. This red-haired youth was so angry that the veins on his face were showing. Tadano kept muttering that Kusanagi was a damn person. Then, full of anger, Tadano cast his magic power on Kusanagi. As soon as he finished reciting the spell, Tadano said that he would kill Kusanagi. This red-haired youth had even created a magic circle while screaming. A panicked Yuika tries to ask what Tadano is trying to do. Seeing Tadano exert his magic power on Kusanagi, everyone standing behind him did the same while saying that Kusanagi would die. Realizing the situation was getting dangerous, Yuika jumped in front of Kusanagi to protect him. But she was too late because the fire hit Kusanagi's body first. Tadano laughed with satisfaction with a terrible look on his face. He was sure that Kusanaga's wiles couldn't help him against that much power. Two of Tadano's colleagues looked worried. They wondered if Kusanagi died. With a happy smile, Tadano said that was certain. Tadano taught his frightened friends to reason that they had accidentally used magic outside of school and it was out of control. And coincidentally, Kusanagi was caught in the middle of that tragedy. That was the story they would use as a ruse. But Tadano's comrades thought they had gone too far because the ground beneath where Kusanagi stood was even to the point of a big hole. Suddenly, from behind the thick dust, a young man walked out saying he had tolerated Tadano's attitude all this time, thinking he was just a child. But apparently, Tadano's stupidity can only be cured by death. Kusanagi casually said it was time to teach a lesson. Tadano and all of his comrades were shocked to see that the Kusanagi was still alive even after taking so many magical attacks. Kusanagi says Tadano's attitude has gone overboard since he even dragged Yuika into this. So Kusanagi was asking how rotten Tadano was. Instead of realizing Tadano's mistake, he got angry and said all of this was Kusanagi and Yuika's fault for daring to make him look stupid. Tadano created another magic circle saying they just need to keep attacking Kusanagi until they die. This time, Kusanagi did not remain silent. He created a small yellow magic circle. Kusanagi was laughed at because the yellow magic circle was small. They asked Kusanagi what the little circle was. Then Tadano attacked Kusanagi once again with a large burst of fire. Tadano shouted again and said Kusanagi would die this time. Meanwhile, countering their attacks, Kusanagi simply chanted an incantation in a low voice that read Magic Drain. With that, came out large and many root tendrils. The tendrils instantly bound Tadano and the rest of his gang. They panicked, tied like that, then asked to be released. But slowly they limped because they run out of strength. After everyone fell unconscious, Kusanagi pulled his tendrils again. Kusanagi approached Tadano and was astonished that he had just absorbed a bit of his magic and they had all passed out. Kusanagi thought this should teach them a little lesson. Yuika, who was still sitting in the same place, was astonished. She asked himself what magic did Kusanagi just use. She was amazed to see what happened, at the same time wondering why Tadano and his gang are unconscious. Upon seeing Kusanagi get up and prepare to leave, Yuika immediately stood up to ask him to wait. Yuika asks Kusanagi what is that magic? What happened to Tadano, and shouldn't Kusanagi be able to use magic well? Then Yuika finally asks who exactly is this Kusanagi standing in front of her. In response to Yuika's continuous questioning, Kusanagi couldn't help but sigh and thought this was annoying. Kusanagi said rather than asking a question, shouldn't Yuika have said something else? Yuika awkwardly thanked him for helping her. When Yuika turned to ask her question to be answered, Kusanagi suddenly disappeared from her sight. Yuika angrily asks where did Kusanagi go. As night fell, Kusanagi headed back to the old Shibuya town. He uses magic to jump from one building to another. Kusanagi spread his aura around to track down all the locations of this town. Kusanagi wasn't feeling well, so he came to the town again to check. As expected, Kusanagi killed them during the day, but at night the monsters appeared again. This young man wondered if this was a bad man. Kusanagi thought if only in the Shibuya area, he alone is more than enough to clean up the area. But the thing is Kusanagi also sensed their presence elsewhere. Kusanagi thought this might also make things difficult for the police. Even the police mages in this age weren't that great. Even if it wasn't so, Kusanagi wouldn't kill all the monsters in Japan by himself. Sitting on top of the building, Kusanagi wondered what he should do about this. He had to devise the best plan. Finally, Kusanagi jumped in and decided to clean up the monsters in this Shibuya area first. Being careful not to attract too much attention from others, Kusanagi stood in the sky with the help of magic, then killed every monster under him with a single strike. In one corner of this old city, there was a drunken man who was staggering while babbling incoherently. The drunk man didn't know that a man was being targeted by a big monster. When it felt the opportunity, the monster opened its mouth wide and prepared to eat the man. But quickly Kusanagi attacked the monster until it was thrown behind a fairly high wall. So when the drunk man looked back, there was nothing behind him. As soon as the man took another step away, Kusanagi was relieved that he wasn't caught by the drunk man. Then quickly this young man again jumped away with the help of his magic. What Kusanagi didn't know, there was a young man who managed to record all of his prowess in killing monsters. The foreign man smiled happily when he saw the recording and realized that the recording deserved to go viral. Finally, all the children who were involved in incidents of using magic outside the school yesterday were gathered. The teacher said it was a matter of concern to them that some students had been seen using magic outside the school grounds. Because if that's true, then it's not. They have no other choice but to expel these students. The master patiently asked them to explain what happened. Tadano immediately said loudly that it was not him and his gang who used magic but the Kusanagi who came to them to fight. Kusanagi just sighed when he saw that the young man could lie so easily. He was honestly even amazed that a kid could lie that easily when he wouldn't even be able to shut his mouth from the truth. It's troublesome, but Kusanagi has to defend herself. When Kusanagi was about to open his mouth, suddenly the only girl in the room screamed out loud saying that Tadano was lying. Yuika said out loud that it was the Kusanagi who had been bullied by Tadano and his friends. They were the first to use magic to attack Kusanagi. The teacher asked, does Kusanagi also use magic? Yuika answered loudly that it was a form of self-defense, and the Kusanagi didn't do anything bad with it. Tadano panicked and still tried to deny it by saying he didn't do anything. Instantly Yuika was angry and immediately told him to be quiet. Yuika asks what kind of person would bully someone and then blame the victim when they are faced with the consequences of their own mistakes. Yuika asked loudly right in Tadano's face, wasn't he embarrassed? Tadano panicked and stuttered when he answered that little Kusanagi didn't deserve to be in that school. So Tadano reasoned that he would only clean up the trash. Yuika glared at him and said that it was Tada who didn't deserve to be in that school. Hearing this, Tadano went crazy. She boldly said that she was first-rate in terms of magic power, that's why she deserved to be by Yuika's side, not the rotten little Kusanagi. Yuika was surprised to hear that. She asked what Tadano was trying to say. Tadano goes crazy and tells Yuika to open her eyes so she won't be fooled by the Kusanagi, and becomes Tadano's woman. Seeing Tadano's crazy attitude, Yuika coldly answered no. Then Yuika firmly said that she rejected Tadano because he was a bully and a rude person. In addition, the time this young man chose to express his feelings was very inappropriate. Kusanagi, who had been standing on the other side of the room, thought that Tadano deserved that. But still, it seemed very cruel to him. The headmaster, who had been sitting quietly behind his big desk, said that it was Tadano and his friends who were at fault here, while Kusanagi uses magic only for self-defense. Then firmly the head of the school, who has this beard, said their school doesn't need people who use magic because of selfishness. So Tadano and all of his friends were finally expelled from the school. All of Tadano's friends panicked when they heard that they would be expelled from school. They tried to defend themselves by saying they were forced to use magic powers because they followed Tadano's orders. Meanwhile, Kusanagi and Yuika can go back to their classes. After exiting the teacher's room, Yuika continued to grumble along the hallway. According to him, Tadano is the worst man, and Yuika never even regretted this. Kusanagi asked what would happen to all of them after they were expelled. Yuika replies they won't be able to become a magician anymore. Yuika then scolds Kusanagi and reminds him that he should have raised his voice in self-defense. Inside his heart, Kusanagi thought that she was about to speak, but Yuika got ahead of him. Instead of answering, Kusanagi stared at Yuika intently, making the girl uncomfortable, and asked why. Kusanagi said that he thought back to the several times Yuika had tried to save him. The first time was in class, then during the fight, and the last time was just now in front of the teachers. Finally, Kusanagi smiled and concluded that Yuika was a good crazy girl. Hearing that compliment as well as Kusanagi's earnest expression made Yuika blush and blush. This girl ran first to class while asking Kusanagi to be quiet with a trembling voice. After Yuika left, Kusanagi touched his left chest and thought Minato's Kusanagi had died and he was the incarnated one. So he was wondering if Kusanagi died because of being bullied, or was it just an ordinary car accident? He didn't know, but this great magician believed that Tadano and his cohorts were responsible for the incident. Now he hopes that what Tadano and his colleagues received was the reward for their actions. Right now, 2 students were facing the headmaster asking how many students used magic outside the school and how many people were trapped inside. The principal replied that there was no damage to the general public. Then the student asked why the principal called him. The principal answered that the girl who got caught up in the fight was Mizuha Yuika. Hearing that, the adult female student who was in front of the headmaster immediately turned around while saying coldly that she understood the situation. He thanked the principal for telling him this information. The principal asked the girl to say hello to me. The girl answered bravely that the principal didn't need to worry about that because her father intended to invest in this school. Meanwhile, a student who always follows the girl thinks that if what the headmaster said is true, then the student named Kusanagi must be very strong. Moreover, he can fight several magicians at once, which is almost impossible. The girl realized one student against many students would not win unless there was a large difference in strength. The boy student asked the girl by his side if she thought Kusanagi was more powerful than the 2 of them. The girl answered no, but she was interested in Kusanagi. The youth asked what they would do now. The girl answered that they would first check about the Minato Kusanagi student competition, and then they would decide whether to get rid of her little sister or not. The long-haired student is the second-year student Mizuha Yuika, who is also Yuika's older sister. Meanwhile, the young man by her side is named Katsuragi Ryuji, who is also a third-year student and Ruka's classmate. Right now, Kusanagi was laying his head on the table in annoyance because according to him the current situation was too peaceful for him to be lacking in motivation. Meanwhile, all the youths in Kusanagi's class were watching a video about him defeating monsters that night. Kusanagi listened to his comrades mention dark magicians. She just thought maybe it was like noble magicians. But in the end, Kusanagi thought it was none of his business, even though the figure in the video is he who is wearing a hood and a face mask. Suddenly the master called Kusanagi and gathered him with the other students in the strength measurement room. The male teacher said the students who could not be measured at that time can be measured for their strength now. Yuika, who was watching on the other side of the room, felt relieved because she would finally know the level of Kusanagi's power. Suddenly Mizuha Yuika and Katsuragi Ryuji came in, making the year 1 student startled, especially Yuika, who was very surprised to see her sister enter the room. Yuika wondered what her sister was doing in that place. Finally, it was Kusanagi's turn to come forward to test his magic power. Kusanagi remembered well that he had destroyed the examination stone the last time, so now he had to be very careful. Youth is against very hard work to withstand his strength, until finally he could not stand it and let go of the power stone. The master approached him and asked worriedly if Kusanagi was alright. The master said now they had the result. Everyone saw that Kusanagi's attribute was none, and the magic number was 100. The other students whispered to each other and realized that 100 was the lowest number among their current batch. They also thought being attributeless was a bit rare among magicians. Some even said that meant Kusanagi was useless. Ryuji says no evidence can confirm the rumor that the Kusanagi defeated the hooligans alone. Ruika takes Ryuji away, saying they're done looking around here. Meanwhile, Kusanagi's classmates laugh at him because he is exhausted just from the examination. They say Kusanagi became like that because of his low magic power. The teacher bowed at Kusanaga's side and encouraged the young man not to think too much about what the people around him said because the amount of magic power didn't mean anything. Meanwhile, Yuika looks very angry because she knows best that Kusanagi can defeat the demon soldiers. So should Kusanagi be able to use both fire and none attributes? Yuika thought that she had never heard of something like adjusting the amount of magic power herself, but she wondered what Kusanagi had done to make it that low. Kusanagi herself instead heaved a sigh of relief. He was happy that the results came out as perfect as he hoped. He only needed to use a bit of magic manipulation just now, but it sure put pressure on him. Luckily, he managed to do it. While returning to class, Kusanagi and Yuika walked together. Kusanagi asked why Yuika was also at the inspection house. Yuika nervously replied that she was just a little curious. Suddenly, their steps were stopped by Ruka and Ryuji. Feeling unfamiliar, Kusanagi asked who are these two. Ruka replies that she is the eldest daughter of the Mizuha family, and by her side was Ryuji. They are both in their third year now. Without further ado, Kusanagi asked what Ruka wanted. Ruka said she no longer had any business with Kusanagi, but she stood right in front of Yuika and said it seemed Yuika wasn't even a match for those delinquents, because Ruka heard that her little sister was instead saved by someone who had magic powers. Ruka asked curtly, is the formula correct? Yuika timidly replied that it was. Instantly, Ruka told his younger sister to leave the academy. Yuika is shocked and asks why she has to do that. The older sister replied that Yuika had won against her even once, whether it's in academics, sports, or even magic. Yuika always loses against Ruka in every way. Ruka ruthlessly says that Yuika is not cut out to be a witch, and emphatically said that one person was more than enough for their family. Yuika was flustered. She wanted to answer, but her sister interrupted by saying that Yuika just had to hear her words, namely leaving the academy and entering a regular school. Yuika looked scared, and Ruka kept forcing him while asking if his little sister heard and understood what he meant. Reluctantly and full of fear, Yuika finally said yes. Kusanagi, who couldn't bear to watch what happened in front of him, finally said that Ruka was quite arrogant. Instantly, Ruka got angry and asked what Kusanagi meant. Kusanagi casually replied that Ruka kept talking non-stop without trying to hear what the other person wanted to say. So Kusanagi was asking, if that kind of attitude isn't arrogant, then what is it? Ruka replies sarcastically that this is a talk between family and outsiders need not interfere. Kusanagi replied that it wasn't talking to her, it sounded like Ruka was bossing Yuika around. Ruka was inflamed hearing that. She asked annoyed what Kusanagi meant. Kusanagi casually said forcing other people's way of life is something that even a family shouldn't do. It's the same as telling other people to give up on their dreams. Ruka answered confidently that her younger sister had no potential to become a witch because she had never once won against her. Hearing Ruka's words, Yuika was getting worse and sadder, even to tears. Inside her heart, Yuika confirmed her older sister's words that she had no talent. All this time she had told herself that she was a genius and that she would become one of the greats, even though currently she had never even won against her elder sister. But like an oasis in the desert, Kusanagi suddenly said confidently that Yuika could win against Ruka. Hearing that, Yuika felt like she heard a new hope. Ruka was shocked by Kusanagi's words, but Kusanagi explained that it might still be impossible now. Finally, Ruka said that within 2 weeks, she challenged the two of them to a 2-on-2 duel in magic. Kusanagi smiled upon hearing that. He seemed to underestimate Ruka. Ruka curtly said, after just now Kusanagi was spouting such nonsense because he intends to run away. Kusanagi answered it's fine, because he will accept the challenge. Then Kusanagi turned to Yuika with a sweet smile and asked how Yuika thought about this challenge. Yuika looked scared to the point of stammering, but finally loudly said she would join in on the duel too. Kusanagi was relieved to hear Yuika's decision. Then this youth said if they won, Ruka must not say such things to Yuika anymore. But Ruka says if they win then her sister will have to leave the academy. Ruka turned around after saying that. She added that later in the fight there would be no holding back. Ryuji also requests that Kusanagi and Yuika be available to face reality. A few moments later, Kusanagi was invited by Yuika to go to the rooftop. Yuika said she wanted to ask Kusanagi for help. This girl asked Kusanagi to teach her more about magic. Kusanagi took a deep breath. At first, he was wondering why Yuika taught him on the rooftop. Kusanagi replied he was just a lowly magician with 100 magic powers. So is it true that Yuika wants to learn from him? Yuika says that she knows Kusanagi is hiding his true power. Yuika knew that Kusanagi was stronger than her. Kusanagi was shocked to hear that, especially when Yuika said that Kusanagi knew how to be strong. That's why Kusanagi believes Yuika can beat Ruka, so Yuika guessed. Hearing Yuika's conclusion, Kusanagi thought there were people with the type to want to control everything at times. That was the real reason Kusanagi stepped in, so Ruka was provoked and challenged him to a duel. But there was no way he would say that to Yuika. Yuika suddenly bent down and wholeheartedly begged Kusanagi to teach her. Kusanagi finally sighed and said alright, he did it. Yuika was taken aback, but Kusanagi said that Yuika had to go along with everything he said and couldn't give up halfway. Yuika jumped for joy and cheerfully agreed to Kusanaga's words. Kusanagi thought how could he refuse if Yuika begged like that. Apart from that, he thought that he had to start preparing everything for the possibility that would happen. Kusanagi came to the conclusion that raising a magician wasn't bad either. Kusanagi says they will start practicing today. When he is about to talk about the practice site, suddenly Yuika interrupts hesitantly saying, "Will Kusanagi come to the house to practice?" Eventually, the two of them arrived at the large Yuika's house. They are currently warming up outside. Kusanagi was endlessly amazed at how big Yuika's house was. Yuika explained that his father was a noble magician, so this was nothing to their family. Yuika just realized in her heart that it was the first time this girl has brought a male friend home. Yuika wondered in her heart if Kusanagi would think strangely of herself for being invited to the house, though it didn't mean that she wanted to do something strange. Kusanagi called Yuika's name a few times as they were about to start, but the girl was lost in thought. Yuika was suddenly startled when she realized Kusanagi called her first name. Yuika's face turned red and she asked why did Kusanagi call her by her first name. With an innocent face, Kusanagi replied that it was because Yuika's older sister also had the surname Mizuha. If he called Mizuha too, people wouldn't know who Kusanagi was calling. Yuika finally understood Kusanagi's meaning. Seeing Yuika's disappointed face, Kusanagi asked if maybe Yuika wanted to be called by another name. Yuika nervously answered no, and said Kusanagi could call her Yuika. Now they will start the training session. First, Kusanagi will ask what exactly is magic power. Yuika said it was an easy question. Then Yuika says magic is the power in the body needed to do magic. Then Kusanagi asked again what is a spell. Once again, Yuika answered confidently that a spell is a program that automatically converts magic power into magic arts. Then Kusanagi asked again if it was possible for someone to increase their magic power. Yuika answered that it was impossible, because the amount of magic power was determined from the time it was in the womb. The amount of magic power will stop increasing until a certain age range. Yuika looked confident as she asked Kusanagi's opinion on her entire answer, which sounded perfect. But firmly Kusanagi said that all of the girl's answers were wrong. Instantly Yuika was shocked and her eyes filled with tears. Kusanagi massaged his temples when he realized that magicians in this era were really stupid. Kusanagi to the point of wondering in his heart what has happened in the past 5 years. Kusanagi then explained that magic power does not only exist in your body but also exists in the wild. The second spell was simply a tool to support the magical arts, and it made it possible to increase one's amount of magic. Yuika was shocked in doing that was impossible, because if that's true it will ravage the Magic Academy. Kusanagi says it doesn't matter whether Yuika will believe it or not. What is clear is that this young man will teach about the 3 things just said. Then he made Yuika sit cross-legged on the ground and Kusanagi would start the real training right away. He would pass his magic power on to Yuika now. Kusanagi asked Yuika to tell her when she felt the magic power. Yuika asked what would happen if she couldn't feel the magic power. Kusanagi replied casually that the girl couldn't become strong if she couldn't feel it. Kusanagi then told Yuika to close her eyes and concentrate because she would start touching Yuika's body by placing his hand on Yuika's back. Then quickly this young man channeled his considerable magic energy. It's a shame that Yuika hasn't been able to feel her magical energy yet. So Kusanagi exerted even more magic energy, even covering the entire large Yuika family's house. Kusanagi was surprised because Yuika still couldn't feel her magic energy, which was already this powerful. Suddenly Yuika shouted saying that her back felt hot. She was surprised to feel something suddenly. Yuika looked back, and Kusanagi explained that earlier was the power of magic power. Yuika now understood what it meant to feel magic power. Kusanagi asked Yuika to remember that feeling well. If Yuika could sense it then she could detect it. That way she is able to find magic power in nature. Kusanagi asked Yuika to make that her goal now. Yuika smiled confidently. Then she said as the second princess of the Mizuha family, she would get the hang of it in no time. But in his heart, Kusanagi knew that this girl didn't seem to have the talent to become a magician, because she could only feel her magical energy after being given so much magic power. 1 week later they were still practicing hard, but Yuika screamed in frustration because she couldn't do this practice anymore. Kusanagi pouted in annoyance because it's been a week. They practice diligently but Yuika often bugs them. But the duel time was getting closer. Kusanagi finally said he would give his magic power one more time for Yuika to detect. This time, Yuika was asked to open her eyes and look directly at the magic energy itself. Yuika was shocked when she saw that was the true form of magic power. Yuika smiled happily because she could finally see mana. This girl was still amazed to see the mana coming out of her body. Then Yuika realized that it might be possible to see the mana of Kusanagi now. So Yuika looked at Kusanagi and sure enough, she could see the mana energy around Kusanagi. While being stared at by the girl before him, Kusanagi suddenly said that Yuika had done a good job. Hearing compliments from Kusanagi made Yuika nervous and said that it was normal for her. Kusanagi explained, now that Yuika understood the meaning of mana, it was time to adjust the amount of mana Yuika had. Kusanagi will teach using magic according to the amount of mana available, by minimizing attacks, which can be used several times. Kusanagi asked to throw away the useless ones to focus more on efficiency. Don't forget to use mana to the limit, because the amount of mana will increase after recovery. Kusanagi advised Yuika to maximize usage as long as she can feel mana. Kusanagi knew this was different from what the academy taught, so he says it's okay if Yuika doesn't believe him, but suddenly Yuika says she believes in Kusanagi and won't doubt Kusanagi anymore. In that case, Kusanagi asked for the next stage of training. Kusanagi asked Yuika to step back a little because this young man would take off his jacket and they would practice sparring. Yuika smiled happily because this way she would see Kusanagi's true power. For the first strike, Yuika deployed Aqua Sorcery, a water circle attack that Kusanagi could block with a barrier. Yuika was surprised that her attack was being blocked like that. Kusanagi explained it was a first-level non-attribute magic barrier. If Yuika couldn't even beat this, then how could she beat Ruka? Yuika was even more excited by Kusanagi's words, so she immediately attacked again with ice bullets. Yuika's attack this time was straight, so it's easy to predict. Kusanagi asked the girl to move while using magic. She would lose if he stood still as long as her opponent was a mage. Yuika got even more excited at that. Finally, Yuika fell exhausted with a gasp. Kusanagi came covering Yuika while saying that the girl used too much of her mana. If Yuika could adjust her mana, then there shouldn't be any need to cast spells. Then Kusanagi gave an example of the design of shooting fire at the straw statue. Kusanagi shot the statue twice as a form of attack from both Yuika and Kusanagi himself. From the two forms of attack, Yuika realized her mana was too dispersing. Kusanagi confirmed Yuika's guess. Kusanagi reminded me once again that one could use magic while having enough mana. Yuika asked if that means being able to attack without casting a spell. Kusanagi confirmed this one as well. Now first Yuika has to learn to shorten her spells. Once Yuika could adjust her mana, then she wouldn't need to use spells anymore, because it would be more profitable during battle if you could shorten spells. And Yuika doesn't need to waste her mana while chanting. Yuika concluded, in other words, would it strengthen her magic? Kusanagi confirmed it. Kusanagi asked Yuika to practice some more and not waste time. This time it was Kusanagi who created the magic circle first and directed the attack at Yuika. He advised Yuika to continue practicing as if her life was at stake. Not long after, Yuika completely collapsed, unable to do anything else. Kusanagi crouched down to ask if the girl was still alive, because they will do exercises like that every day. At night in Harajuku, Kusanagi again goes around killing monsters. He was surprised because in Harajuku there are also monsters. This youth deduced that the monsters' goods did not decrease even after being slaughtered. Kusanagi, so I was wondering what exactly happened. Then in one corner of the city, he felt a monster about to attack a girl. Kusanagi quickly went towards the monster and beat it quickly. Then he asked the victim if the girl was okay. Instead of answering, the girl took her cell phone and took pictures of Kusanagi without permission. Annoyed, Kusanagi immediately jumped away. This young man was annoyed because suddenly the girl took a photo without saying thank you. Kusanagi thinks this is a millennial tradition now. While jumping away, this young man thought about using a mask another time. The next day after school, again Kusanagi and Yuika practiced so hard that Yuika reached her last point. She fell down with a gasp. Kusanagi thought there were still a few days left before the duel. Yuika has indeed developed quite well, but she still has many shortcomings compared to Ruka. Kusanagi concludes it's impossible for Yuika to win over Ruka at this rate. Finally, Kusanagi said Yuika may give up. However, Yuika even got up again and said that she had always been compared to her older sister. She couldn't beat her older sister in any way. In the end, Yuika is forced to give up on everything. But the magic was something Yuika didn't want to let go of. Never thought no matter what. Kusanagi says Yuika won't win. But Yuika firmly asked for the training to be tightened up again. Hearing that, Kusanagi got excited and said that she wouldn't hold back anymore. The two of them practiced so hard, over and over again, until dusk came and Yuika ran out of mana and was always carried by Kusanagi to rest at home. Finally, at a practice, Yuika managed to destroy the barrier that Kusanagi had made. Yuika lay down smiling happily, saying it finally worked. Kusanagi congratulated me while adding that it was good work. Finally, game day arrived. They were standing in front of the school, and Kusanagi asked if the girl was ready. Yuika firmly answered already, but they were surprised when in front of the school many journalists greeted them. They asked Yuika what she thought of this duel, and is it true that she is fighting with her older sister. Yuika asks what are all these people up to. They replied this was because the siblings from the Mizuha family were going to have a duel, so it was only natural that the reporters would get excited. Kusanagi finally understood how important the bloodline of a magical noble family was, because it was only because of the fights between students that the journalists went into an uproar. Finally, all the students gathered in the arena of competition. Kusanagi, who saw the enthusiasm of many students, asked, "Don't Yuika think this is a bit excessive?" Yuika answered that a magic duel was rare, but for Kusanagi it still looks like there will be a big event. Kusanagi also noticed that Yuika was quite depressed by this situation, until finally someone asked the two participants to come forward. Yuika nervously replied okay. Before she actually got on top of the arena, Kusanagi called out to her and asked her to cheer up. Hearing that, Yuika smiled and replied excitedly that of course, I'll be excited this time. Yuika thought Kusanagi was a very mysterious person, but his words always resonated inside Yuika's heart. At this time, Yuika was already facing off against her older sister, Ruka. With a dirty face, her older sister asked so Yuika didn't run. This time, with full courage, Yuika answered of course she won't run away. Seeing his sister's courage, Ruka even said it was a rude attitude. Then he asked sarcastically, did his sister think she could win against someone like Ruka? Yuika firmly answered she would definitely win. Seeing her sister's enthusiasm, Ruka realized that her sister had grown in these 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Yuika was already on alert, knowing that her older sister was very strong. The mana difference between them was huge, but she still believed that she would definitely not lose. Finally, the host said loudly that the magic duel was about to begin. With that, Yuika immediately attacked Ruka. This girl concluded that if she shortened mana, then she could attack her older sister more intensely. Kusanagi knows the basis of a battle is to constantly move. Ruka should also know the basics of fighting two magicians. In comparison, Yuika was too nervous to forget to move. Yuika could miss her chance. The two girls are sisters attacking each other, this time with the first level of aqua sorcery. The force of the wound was so great that Yuika was hit by a splash of ice. But Yuika was shocked because she was able to withstand the power that she couldn't hold back before. At this point, Yuika realized that she had gotten stronger. Likewise, Ruka said that in just 2 weeks his sister had become stronger than before. Yuika smiled happily because her older sister praised her ability. Ruka says why is her sister so happy? It's just a match, so Ruka isn't praising her. Now Ruka will level up her magic. She deployed a bigger ice attack, so Yuika had to block it with a magic circle. It was the second level of Water Blitz. A water attack can form a weapon to repel its opponent. Yuika was completely knocked back from the arena and fell right at Kusanaga's side. Even so, Kusanagi had no intention of helping the girl. Kusanagi concluded in his heart that in terms of chanting speed, Yuika's chance of winning was indeed higher. But his opponent was stronger. Ruka walked closer to the edge of the arena and commented that Kusanagi was a bad man for not helping Yuika, even though he had protected her before. Kusanagi casually said it was unnecessary for Yuika, because now even though the girl's body was shaking, Yuika was able to stand up again. Ruka was shocked and asked how could his sister still be awake, for having attacked her sister using level 2 magic. Yuika said emphatically not to lose since magic was the only thing she wanted to have. Even if losing this other one is something I will never let go of. Then, Yuika created a magic circle and immediately charged at her older sister with an equal amount of damage. Ruka didn't really attack but counterattacked instead. Finally, Yuika's voice trembled and said she would win for sure, and she would not give up. But in the end, the girl fainted. The host announced over the loudspeaker that participant Yuika had run out of mana, and the winner is Ruka. Yuika was still trying to stand up, and with a trembling voice she said couldn't do anything. This time, Kusanagi approached Yuika. The youth realized this was a battle of magic power depending on mana usage. But Yuika loses because the amount of mana is too different. While walking past Yuika, Ruka says that her sister has no talent. Then asked Kusanagi didn't he also think like that. Kusanagi confirmed that while Yuika was talentless, she was clumsy and also very slow to improve, inefficient, and gets weaker and weaker in real combat. But she is a hard worker. She diligently practiced every day like a fool. Ruka interrupts saying this is the end result, defeat. Kusanagi confirmed that Yuika lost, but Kusanagi openly and with a wide smile said that he likes a hard worker like Yuika. Hearing that, Yuika immediately cried because she heard. Kusanagi says Yuika is his student, so he gets offended when Ruka talks badly about Yuika. Hearing such a defense, Yuika immediately cried even louder. Meanwhile, Ruka says Kusanagi is too arrogant for someone with 100 mana. Kusanagi confidently says this person with 100 mana will beat Ruka. Ruka says that Kusanagi is really good at boasting, but it's not Ruka who will be his opponent. Ryuji stepped up, and he looked pleased that it was finally his turn. While passing by Ryuji, Ruka asked the young man to take care of this quickly. Ryuji asked Ruka not to keep saying that. Meanwhile, Kusanagi lifted Yuika's body and placed her to sit on the edge of the arena. Kusanagi asked Yuika to pay close attention to the match. Yuika gently agreed to Kusanagi's request. But before Kusanagi could go up, Yuika noticed that her wound had already healed. While on top of the arena, Kusanagi thought that even though he said he would beat them with 100 mana, this young man realized he wouldn't win if he didn't take it seriously. Kusanagi concluded that he would keep his mana at level 100, using only no attributes and no spells. Kusanagi didn't prepare any magic protection either, so if he was attacked directly, then he would definitely die. But according to Kusanagi, it was instead a fun situation. Ryuji confidently said he would not go easy on Kusanagi. Hearing that, Kusanagi said he'd be the one to hold back. Ryuji's friends told him to go easy on Kusanagi and to take it easy when fighting him. Kusanagi realized that his opponent had 8,000 mana. Normally that wouldn't be a problem for Kusanagi, but right now he only had 100 mana. Kusanagi thought he might die if he let his guard down. The figure behind the loudspeaker announced that the second match could begin. Ryuji immediately created many magic circles and asked Kusanagi not to hold grudges against him later. Ryuji thought that this one powerful attack would later be able to test whether it was true that Kusanagi was the one who had defeated the school delinquents yesterday. Ryuji wondered in his heart, could a Kusanagi Minato survive this powerful attack later? But before Ryuji attacked, he was first hit by a deadly attack right in the head from Kusanagi. The young man said Ryuji was too slow. Everyone was stunned because the match ended so quickly. The host announced loudly that the winner was Kusanagi. Ruka, who approached Ryuji, realized that the young man had only fainted. But he was surprised because Ryuji managed to be knocked unconscious with just one attack, even though Ruka didn't even hear anything. Does Ruka wonder what trick Kusanagi is using? Kusanagi stood behind Ruka and said he had finished his match quickly as Ruka asked. Hearing that made Ruka upset. Yuika, who was at the edge of the arena, was also stunned and noticed the extraordinary way of fighting Kusanagi. Ruka stood up and said to Kusanagi that he seemed pretty good. Kusanagi replied casually that he was indeed more powerful than Ruka. Hearing Kusanagi's words, Ruka said that again the young man was boasting. Kusanagi saw that Ruka's mana was 10,000. Which meant this girl was stronger than Ryuji. The MC said over the loudspeaker that something unexpected happened in the second match. Kusanagi's way of fighting attracts attention, so the third match will be held to decide who wins this duel. Then the third match is about to begin. Kusanagi and Ruka immediately created a magic circle to attack each other. Kusanagi thought that he only had 100 meanings, so he only had low-level magic power. That's why his attacks have no effect unless he manages to hit Ruka's head. It seemed Ruka realized that defending was better than moving against Kusanagi, who was constantly aiming for his head. Ruka finally has the chance to strike back with the water's considerable power. Surprisingly, even though he was sure that Kusanagi was hit by the attack, the young man could still stand without getting even a little wet. Ruka was surprised to see that Kusanagi was fine and didn't seem to use any magic to fend off the attacks. Ruka wondered what her opponent had done to dodge the attacks. The audience was surprised because Kusanagi was fine even though he had just been hit. They were wondering what happened, seeing that Kusanagi didn't even get wet despite being hit by that attack. Yuika, who was at the edge of the arena, smiled seeing how intense Kusanagi's battle was. She also wondered in her heart what technique Kusanagi used just now to escape that attack. Once again, Ruka tries to attack Kusanagi with a fairly strong fire attack, but Kusanagi nimbly dodged it. Now Ruka just saw Kusanagi dodge without using any magic. Meanwhile, Yuika finds out that Kusanagi can attack magic with another battle. Even if Kusanagi had a stark difference in power, she could still handle it. It's basic knowledge that if you don't do that, one can get hurt. Level 2 techniques mean a difference in speed and mass. It's impossible to escape unscathed. Ruka was annoyed and asked in her heart, didn't Kusanagi feel scared? Kusanagi is aware that it will be possible to dodge as long as it can sense and detect mana. Besides that, he also needs the courage to do it. Then, now Ruka will use level 3 Azure Splash. That is level 3 magic that looks really terrible. The spectators realized that it would be dire if they were to be hit directly by that attack. The water attack that formed crystals hit where Kusanagi was standing. Even though Ruka fell down from exhaustion and ran out of mana, she smiled with relief knowing Kusanagi wouldn't be able to avoid it. But suddenly this girl was hit right in the forehead by Kusanagi. Ruka-senpai is shocked and says it's impossible. Kala saw Kusanagi standing right in front of him in fine condition. Ruka wondered how this young man had managed to dodge such an all-encompassing attack. Kusanagi replied casually that he was using a magic drain that was capable of absorbing magic. Then he walked through the magic. It was clear how Kusanagi's footsteps were right behind his back. The floor behind this young man was still intact because he used magic to bypass the attack. Ruka laughed when he saw the intact floor. She now understood that Kusanagi was just passing by her. After laughing, Ruka finally admitted defeat. The MC announced over the loudspeaker that they didn't even expect this third match to be won by Kusanagi. After the match was decided over, Yuika came up on stage and asked if the two of them were okay. Kusanagi replied they were both fine. With a relieved smile, Kusanagi told Yuika that he had won. Yuika was even moved to tears at that. Ruka said as promised she wouldn't say anything else, and Yuika was free to do whatever she wanted. Kusanagi realized the situation of the two sisters. He said that Yuika's wounds were quite shallow, so he was sure Ruka must be holding back on her little sister. It's not like fighting him. Ruka wanted to deny it, but her cheeks turned red. Kusanagi added that Yuika managed to get stronger within 2 weeks, so her older sister must have realized it too. Because of that, from now on Ruka has to stop being overprotective. Yuika said firmly that she would get stronger so as not to worry her older sister. Finally, Ruka didn't deny it anymore and was able to heave a sigh of relief while answering fine. Now the two sisters were chatting casually, until suddenly Kusanagi felt a strange energy and the sky above their school suddenly turned red. Kusanagi was aware of the presence of evil and abnormal mana energy. They call it a catastrophe. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Tadano and his colleagues were rummaging through Kusanagi's bag. He was determined to find a reason why they could lose the duel even though they were outnumbered. Even so, all they got in the bag were textbooks. They concluded Kusanagi was too diligent. They even searched in the drawers to find something, because they were sure that Kusanagi wouldn't be able to use magic that's strong. When they were looking, suddenly they were all stunned and both stared out the window. They looked at the sky that had suddenly turned red as blood. Do they wonder what happened? One of them mentioned it was the Calamity phenomenon. Kusanagi, Yuika, and Ruka all thought this was Calamity when they saw the sky that was so red. All students who are outside the classroom realized that this is an example of a sign of the emergence of the phenomenon of Calamity, but they looked frightened and could barely believe that there was Calamity in this era. Kusanagi wondered why there could be Calamity. Is this related to the phenomenon in Shinjuku? Kusanagi remembered the first Calamity that happened in Shinjuku. He thought, was this a sign of something? Right after that, numerous magic circles appeared from within, and huge and terrifying monsters emerged. The children were running around in panic, so the teachers were overwhelmed, asking them to calm down. It was at this moment that Kusanagi cast fire magic into the sky, then used speaker magic to speak. Kusanagi reminded everyone to calm down, because only monsters will come out during the opening of Calamity. It shouldn't matter as long as everyone doesn't panic too much. So this young man directed everyone to go to the gymnasium as a place of refuge. He also warned against moving in groups because it is too dangerous to move alone. Kusanagi asked Ruka, Yuika, and Ruji, who had just woken up, to immediately evacuate with the others, while Kusanagi himself will move to save the others. The teacher who heard Kusanagi's decision said he was too rash to move alone to save everyone. Ruji then told the master that he was also going to help the people and Kusanagi, so it should be fine now, according to Ruji. Seeing the abilities of the two students, the teacher finally let them both go while telling them not to push themselves too hard. Then Ruji asked Kusanagi that he won't die, right? Kusanagi just answered with a shrug and a brief shake of the head. Before actually leaving, Kusanagi said one more time to Yuika that he had to leave now to save people. Yuika advised him to always be careful. The overly excited Ruji then goes all out and says that he will go first to his junior, namely Kusanagi. Ruji thought the speed of his powers allowed him to run 100 meters in 10 seconds, so he was wondering if Kusanagi could keep up with his speed. Right after he thought that, suddenly Kusanagi slid by his side using magic power and said go first to his senior, Ruji. Ruji praised Kusanagi's incredible speed, but according to him, just fast is useless. Ruji said he would observe the true power of Kusanagi and he would also save everyone. With her strength, Kusanagi can count 58 mana users in the building, even though he hasn't entered the building yet. Kusanagi could even sense humans without the presence of mana in that building. Kusanagi entered the school building through the window and thought he just needed to look around the building area. As soon as he landed smoothly in the corridor, Kusanagi was immediately greeted by several large monsters. This young man was not afraid and immediately killed them one by one. With the power of fire that is very controlled, this young man can burn monsters in front of him in a short time, but he can also kill monsters that come from behind with ease. After Ruji arrived, Kusanagi had already cleaned the entire area, as evidenced by the many scattered monster corpses. Then, Kusanagi walked past Ruji while saying he was entrusting the process of evacuating everyone on the floor to Ruji. Hearing that, Ruji panicked and said it was too dangerous for Kusanagi if he went alone to fight the monsters. But before Ruji finished speaking, Kusanagi was gone as fast as lightning. Ruji was starting to worry that Kusanagi only saw him as a burden. That's why Kusanagi left him behind. Now Ruji can't say anything because it could be true, considering that Kusanagi can single-handedly destroy all the monsters in this entire area in just seconds. Ruji asked himself, what the heck is Kusanagi? Kusanagi thought he could beat them with a single strike outside. But since the monsters were outside the room, if he used the same laser technique, he might accidentally injure the students. Kusanagi had no choice but to defeat the monsters one by one with low magic power levels. Kusanagi kept running from one person to another to destroy the monsters he encountered. Occasionally, he also browsed the class and destroyed all the monsters in it. Kusanagi realized it would waste a lot of time if he kept bringing a student to the gymnasium every time to save them. Then he remembered something. On the other side of the classroom building, Ryuji shouted at the other students, he will defeat the monsters with his magic power so the other students can quickly evacuate. But suddenly the students screamed in surprise as behind Ryuji, several students flew towards him. Ryuji was shocked, but he already suspected this was Kusanagi's doing. Ryuji was really surprised and asked who the real Kusanagi was. Meanwhile, Kusanagi smiled from the upstairs balcony and watched Ryuji, who was about to receive his delivery person's package. Kusanagi knew Ryuji seemed very capable of taking care of others, so he would be able to deliver all the students safely to the gymnasium. But suddenly Kusanagi felt a very deep fear of a girl who was being cornered by several large monsters. The girl fell to the floor near the stairs with a pale face. She desperately hoped someone would come to save her. He even shouted, begging anyone to come to save her. The cute girl who has 2 braids begged with all her heart for someone to come save her. Right at that moment, a tremendous power appeared, exterminating all the monsters. The girl realized it was the same power that had saved her during the practical exam. Then a Kusanagi appears and asks, "Are you okay?" The girl stared at Kusanagi. She asked if it was Kusanagi who saved her. Kusanagi slightly nervously confirmed it. Then the girl asked again whether it was during the Kusanagi practice class that also saved her. Kusanagi even asked if there really was such an incident. Without further ado, the girl immediately bowed and thanked her wholeheartedly. Kusanagi asked him not to overdo it because he thought it was nothing. Hearing the way of talking, and Kusanagi's faint smile made the girl freeze with her face turning red. Ryuji finally reached the stairs where the two of them were chatting. Does Ryuji ask who else needs help? Seeing Ryuji made Kusanagi order the braided girl to follow him. She will be safe if follows Ryuji, while Kusanagi will go up again to save the people on the floor above. Kusanagi knew that there were still many people who needed to be saved. No time to wait for the police to come. Kusanagi must quickly help all the students in the school. Meanwhile, at the presidential building, state officials are having a meeting regarding Calamity's appearance at Kamui Academy. They were excited when they started asking why Calamity appeared in their country. Although the last Calamity appeared 50 years ago, they asked the Prime Minister what to do now. The Prime Minister said his department was still trying to contact the Wildlife Control Division of the Metropolitan Police Department, and of course also noble magicians. The defense forces have also started preparing. The only mages available in the defense squad are those that specialize in disaster relief. All the higher-ups panicked because there weren't any troops that specialized in fighting beasts. In his heart, the Prime Minister realized that was the negative impact of living a quiet life without ever dealing with calamity. Most of the military units are intended for national defense rather than attacking other countries. They could only leave the handling of the beasts to the police and noble magicians. The Prime Minister banged the table in annoyance. The incident from 50 years ago happened again, but Ichikami Minato is no longer with them. Meanwhile, the police panicked. They were driving their car to the location of Calamity. Does the policewoman wonder if it really is a calamity? The person by his side replied that it was unmistakable. The policewoman said they'd been fine for the last 50 years with an astonished expression. His partner replied, meaning the peace was only temporary, but that wasn't the case, that's why their division was here. A male constable from the Beast Countermeasures Division and Metropolitan Police Department is Inspector Shiru Shaogo. The chart is from the female police officer we were chatting with earlier. Meanwhile, this policewoman said she would do her best. Apparently, they are also from the Beast Control Division in the Metropolitan Police Department. They hold the rank of sergeant, and her name is Sanada Karin. She is the policewoman who was rescued by Kusanagi that night. A helicopter flew over the school to report the appearance of Calamity at Kamui's Magic Academy. They became excited because the sky turned red and wild beasts kept appearing like it never stopped. Several reporters also entered the school to report on the condition of students inside the school. For a while, all the students and everyone took refuge in the gymnasium. Meanwhile, the male teacher with other students tried to fight the monsters. They used the magic abilities they can to defeat the monsters together. This news immediately became a trending topic and went viral throughout the internet. Many local residents are watching this news from their mobile phones. Everyone knew the teachers and students at the academy were working hard to defeat the monsters. But there were so many beasts that kept appearing that it was impossible for them to leave the academy. Two young men who were riding the bus noticed while watching the video that the location of Kamui's Magic Academy was close to their current location. And sure enough, some monsters appeared outside the academy attacking civilians. The adults who saw this incident from the top of the office building realized that his condition was getting out of control. From a distance, it is clear that Kamui's academy is being attacked by monsters of various sizes on land and in the air. Everyone was watching this news from their cell phones and televisions. They looked very worried. Meanwhile, Kusanagi kept running down the hall thinking the monsters kept dropping in large numbers. It's almost time to enter the second stage. Powerful creatures will appear as long as they are occupied with another stage. What's more, the creature will continue to appear no matter how many times they manage to defeat it. As long as the boss hasn't been defeated, the monsters will continue to appear. Kusanagi knew the boss would appear in the final stage, so he had to endure until then. According to Kusanagi Calamity, it was truly a nuisance. Kusanagi uses her magic to teleport people. He realized he had gathered a total of 20 people. They were scattered everywhere, so saving them was hard work. Even so, Kusanagi still jumped once more to go to the next destination and save people again. In his classroom, Tadano kept cursing in annoyance while fighting the monsters in front of him. In the end, this young man could only surrender because he couldn't release any more attacks. The demon army that appeared before them was too strong to be defeated. The three of them even cried when they saw this demon army that appeared before them. They warned Tadano not to fight back, but Tadano insisted because yesterday he saw Kusanagi could beat them with just one strike. Does Tadano wonder why he can't? When Tadano was down, a voice answered that Tadano was too weak. Along with that sound came a massive fire-type magic attack that instantly destroyed the demon army, even creating a large hole in the classroom wall. After clearing out the demon soldiers in the room and taunting Tadano, Kusanagi casually walked past them. Seeing that made Kusanagi even more irritated. He was angry because he was again saved by Kusanagi. Suddenly Tadano asked Kusanagi to stop and asked why Kusanagi saved him. Isn't Kusanagi still mad at him? Kusanagi replied casually that he had no particular reason. Kusanagi did that simply because he was capable of it. That is it. Hearing that answer made Tadano even more annoyed. His body was even trembling with anger because it seemed as if he was being insulted again by Kusanagi. Tadano asked Kusanagi not to joke with him. He knew that Kusanagi was a coward. Kusanagi back then couldn't even use magic properly, so why suddenly now Kusanagi can turn so strong? Suddenly Tadano says that Kusanagi Minato should have died after the accident, and he is reborn. Shouldn't one be stronger after being reborn? So Tadano should be stronger than Kusanagi, but why is it the other way around? Tadano was speechless when he asked why he repeatedly lost to someone like Kusanagi. Kusanagi casually said that the strong wouldn't hurt the weak, and the weak don't hurt the weaker than them. Kusanagi also explained that Tadano had been consumed by the foolish thought that he was strong. Right now, Tadano definitely couldn't imagine winning against Kusanagi. Satisfied with saying all that, Kusanagi walked casually past Tadano. Tadano immediately fell to his knees hearing all the details from Kusanagi. He was aware in his heart that he was running away. Tadano ran away from the fact that his strength had not increased since middle school, so he decided to take all of his frustrations out on someone weaker, and the victim used to be Kusanagi. But now he was instead saved by a figure he considered weak. Tadano could not accept that fact. Two of Tadano's colleagues were confused about what they should do. At this point, they were embarrassed to be saved once again by Kusanagi. They wanted to try to comfort Tadano, who was crying, but they were confused about what to do. Kusanagi kept trying to defeat the monsters he found, until finally the demon army appeared again. This time, Kusanagi managed to defeat the monster with just one attack of fire that was so large that it penetrated the school walls. This young man noticed that the number of demon soldiers was increasing. It was a sign that his boss would appear soon. Kusanagi then turned to the students she was helping and told them to calm down since everything was safe now. Meanwhile, Ryuji cursed in annoyance because he felt Kusanagi was throwing all the victims at him. Ryuji couldn't rest against the monsters that kept coming. He attacked the right side. The left side came a monster that wanted to eat one of the female students. Fortunately, Ryuji was quick to get rid of the monster and was determined to protect everyone. Then he asked the juniors to follow him. Seeing how cool Ryuji was, the juniors were amazed with amazed faces. Inside his head, Ryuji was dizzy because there were too many monsters in front of him, even though he had said confidently that he would protect everyone. It was at this time that Kusanagi appeared and said he would help Ryuji. Surprised that Kusanagi appeared suddenly, Ryuji snapped at him and asked him not to appear suddenly like that. Kusanagi ignored Ryuji's words. He instead asked Ryuji to run away as soon as possible after he managed to defeat the monsters. Ryuji was surprised to hear Kusanagi's request, because according to him it was impossible with that many monsters. But Ryuji had not finished speaking. Kusanagi had already used his powerful enough power to clean up the many monsters in front of him. Instantly Ryuji and the other students behind him were dumbfounded by the scene. Kusanagi had to call Ryuji and told him to hurry past and leave. Ryuji hastily invited the other students to run past the monsters. While they were running, many monsters would often attack them, but Kusanagi quickly overcame them. Ryuji smiled and thought Kusanagi was a very extraordinary person. Finally, the monsters in the schoolyard were gone. Kusanagi thought about going back to tracing the school corridor building to look for monsters in the school. Even the teachers and some of the senior students were still trying to defeat some of the monsters outside the school. Yuika, who joined the fight, finally weakened and almost fell. Luckily, her older sister came, and Ruka arrived just in time to hold her younger sister's body. Ruka asks Yuika to come inside if she can't fight. Otherwise, Yuika would only become a burden to others. Yuika insists that she can still fight and says they have no time to rest. Ruka just let Yuika go back to fighting with the others. Ryuji came shouting, saying that he had come with refugees. The teacher asked him to bring the refugees into the room. Ryuji then joined Ruka and Yuika to hold off the monsters that were trying to enter the room. Ryuji asked how the conditions were in that place. Ruka replies they are having a bit of trouble holding off the enemy. Yuika then asks where Kusanagi is. Ryuji. With a big smile, Ryuji said Kusanagi was safe, he was alive and well. Yuika looked relieved. He asked, is that so? Ryuji said Kusanagi was an extraordinary person. With him among them, then it was certain that they would be able to deal with the calamity. Yuika smiled and said she agreed with Ryuji's words. He also believed that with Kusanagi with them, they would be able to pass calamity. But suddenly the sky roared and fire dust fell. The teacher panicked, so he ordered all the children to go inside and evacuate. Now, once again a great rumble sounded and a terrible roar resounded. Tens of powerful monsters appeared more and more. Seeing how many monsters appeared, Ryuji was surprised and asked what was this? Why are there so many beasts? He asked everyone to leave immediately, run away, and save themselves. Right after Ryuji said this, the monsters started attacking them. One of the monsters even intended to attack Yuika, who was running the slowest. Luckily, the monsters that tried to attack Yuika were defeated by the attacks from the police. Inspector Shido asked his comrades to quickly exterminate the monsters and put the safety of civilians first. The students could breathe a sigh of relief because help from the police had finally arrived. Inspector Shido told the kids that everything would be fine since they had come. Now the inspector asked the children to evacuate according to his instructions. But Yuika said firmly that she would fight with the police. But the inspector said the civilians should have taken refuge in the gymnasium. With a stern face, Yuika said that she wasn't a civilian. Then Ruka adds that they are witches. Finally, Inspector Shido accepted that assumption. So he turned to these wizard students for support and asked them to attack from behind. In his heart, this cop realized, to be honest, they were short on people, so these magicians would help him out, even though it felt embarrassing for the police to have to turn to novice magicians for help. Meanwhile, Sergeant Sanada uses his meager strength to help heal injured children. Kusanagi, who saw the arrival of the police from upstairs, felt a little relieved because they finally came. He will leave the rest to the police. But Kusanagi didn't even think the police would arrive before the defense force did. Calamity is a national disaster. A country can't be unprepared for this. Of course, this disaster is quite frightening for a country that has long lived in peace. Kusanagi jumped back down the corridor, saying he just had to do whatever he could do. So this young man will quickly save the remaining disciples. Meanwhile, the female reporter who reported from the helicopter looked excited when she brought the news. She gave the news that the police had arrived at the academy. Even though it was so bad, the creature continued to multiply. Journalists representing the surrounding community asked whether the police alone were enough to deal with this disaster. The reporter excitedly said all of society was waiting for noble magicians to appear. Everyone watching television broadcasts as well as the internet was also looking forward to the noble magicians. The locals have even paid their taxes, so why haven't the noble magicians yet appeared to deal with this disaster? Once again, the reporter represented the residents to request the noble magicians to come immediately. But what he was waiting for instead told his servant to ignore the news. By now, the noble mage of the Fuka family had already heard the news from his servant. He asked his master again if he was sure to ignore the news. The noble mage said the police had more than had enough of this small-scale calamity, so there's no need for noble mages to get involved. After saying that, the noble mage stood up a lot and headed for the large door on the other side of the room. The servant politely asked where the master was going. The noble magician casually said he was going to sleep. Meanwhile, Inspector Shido seemed to be getting overwhelmed by these monsters. He realized the situation was getting worse. The inspector asked the teacher if she could handle some of the monsters that had appeared at the entrance. The master replied that he could not because too many of them were there. Inspector Shido was even more confused because the monsters appeared at a speed they couldn't imagine. So it was impossible to evacuate the civilians in time. The defenders who were supposed to be guarding behind them had not yet arrived. Even the police could only rely on noble magicians, but they couldn't even be contacted. Inspector Shido shouted harshly, saying that noble magicians should exist for situations like this. But in fact, they don't even appear basic to useless humans. Inspector Shido learned this from accessible information, but it's called Calamity for a reason. Inspector Shido asked in his heart, did someone used to handle it this way? And if the boss shows up, what are they supposed to do? Monsters that appear so much. But suddenly a purplish light descended and a huge monster appeared. Instantly everyone was dumbfounded with panicked faces. Even Inspector Shido was sweating seeing that the demon leader that had just appeared was the boss of that calamity. Ruka also knew that the demon leader was a creature that rarely appeared in this era, and even though it rarely appears, only noble magicians are capable of winning against them. Yuika's body trembled at the thought that they needed a magician higher than level 5. But unfortunately, Yuika had never known anyone who could use magic at that level. The demon leader created 3 magic circles, then threw a huge fireball at the children. Yuika, who noticed what a huge ball was headed her way, couldn't help but sit dumbfounded. Luckily, Ruka was by her little sister's side helping her fight with her ice magic. Unfortunately, Ruka's ice magic was still low compared to the demon leader's high-level magic. Finally, Ruka was overwhelmed, and the fireball hit Ruka, who turned to protect Yuika. Yuika was dumbfounded at how quickly everything had happened. Ruka had fainted with a wound on his back. Yuika was shocked. She tried to call Ruka in a weak voice. Seeing that things were getting chaotic, with the last of her strength, Ruka asked Yuika to run with the other people. But Yuika still sat where she was while hugging her sister tightly. In such great chaos, Yuika's voice asking for help drowned out. But this girl did not give up. She was still asking for help from anyone who could hear her voice. In the great chaos, the demon leader created even bigger fireballs. Everyone fell silent and realized that there was no way they could survive. Yuika, with a resigned heart, fearfully called out Kusanagi's name repeatedly for help. Even at the most urgent moment, Yuika finally screamed, calling Kusanagi Minato's name to come to help her, and her sister, who was critical, in his arms. Flames roared as an enormous fireball charged at everyone. But suddenly the demon leader was amazed because someone managed to destroy the fireball quickly. A man's deep voice appeared and apologized to Yuika for arriving too late to help. It was Kusanagi, who was now standing proudly in front of Yuika. Yuika is relieved that Kusanagi has come. She immediately stuttered to tell Kusanagi about Ruka, who was seriously injured. Kusanagi casually said that Ruka just passed out. Kusanagi touched Ruka's body and realized that Ruka wasn't the only one who was hurt and exhausted. But even Yuika and several of the students collapsed in a pathetic state. Kusanagi was annoyed and angry. He stood up quickly and confidently telling Yuika that he would defeat the demon leader. Yuika was taken aback by that, but she quickly said yes. After Yuika said this, a magic circle appeared around them, creating a bright light that was confusing to Yuika at first, until finally he realized that this magic was able to heal all wounds on Ruka's body. Everyone who had fainted had already woken up refreshed. Sergeant Sanada, who saw this, realized that this magic was level 3 holy magic, sacred healing. Healing magic that even Sergeant Sanada couldn't use. So she was wondering in her heart who could use high-level healing magic like this. Sergeant Sanada ran up to Inspector Shido while asking if this senior was alright. Inspector Shido replied he was fine, but he was out of mana. Sergeant Sanada asked again what happened. With his body shaking, Inspector Shido said that he wasn't sure, but what was clear was that they had to protect the civilians. Hearing that, Sergeant Sanada immediately panicked and said that it was reckless considering Inspector Shido's weakened body condition to this extent. But Inspector Shido firmly said that if they didn't fight, everyone would die. Sergeant Sanada now realized how precarious their situation was. He looked around the chaos-filled surroundings. He stuttered, unable to say anything, because the sergeant realized that in reality they had lost. The reporter loudly said that even the police had lost. They can't do anything. But neither the defenders nor the noble mages had appeared, so they could do nothing. The demon leader is getting crazier. The reporters were stunned to see that the police couldn't do anything anymore. If the police at the location were defeated, then it would be the end for all of them. A reporter said noble magicians were useless and they would all die at that location. Everyone watching their broadcast from their cell phones and televisions was also tense and worried. The reporter said that no one could fight against that demon beast. Now they are finished, but there will always be a light of hope for those who still believe. It was at this moment, a young man who was none other than Kusanagi appeared facing the demon leader's line of attack. Sergeant Sanada was startled and panicked at the sight of the students advancing on the group of demons. Inspector Shido tried to shout and call Kusanagi to get away from there, but Kusanagi instead casually stood up to the demon leader beast and said that he had done whatever he pleased. But as if dissatisfied, the demon leader just said, "Kill, kill, and kill." The deep voice of the monster that contained negative energy and was filled with terror made everyone who heard it feel goosebumps. The humans who heard the voice of the monster who kept saying kill made them silent with stiff bodies and frantic minds. Finally, Kusanagi threw a fireball big enough at the demon leader to ask him to be quiet. Instantly the monster demon leader was angry and seemed to control the other monsters to exert his magic power to attack Kusanagi. At this point, Kusanagi realized that he had already attacked with all the strength he had during the previous calamity, so he must restrain himself now so as not to drag more and more human victims around him. but the monster's combined attack was so big it headed toward Kusanagi. The police who saw the incident commented that Kusanagi would die, but suddenly bright greenish magic fends off all the evil magic that was heading towards them. Kusanagi stood up, spreading both arms, deploying his sparkling magic to surround the numerous monsters and finish them off with just one strike. Except for the demon leader, of course. Inspector Shido was astonished at the situation unfolding before his eyes. He asked himself who exactly was the student who dared to fight those monsters alone. Reporters started to get excited about reporting about a student who bravely single-handedly fought the monsters. Unfortunately, they couldn't see the disciple's face clearly because he was standing quite far away. When the reporter and cameraman wanted to get closer to see the student's face more clearly, suddenly someone attacked their camera and destroyed it. It was Yuika's doing. In her heart, this girl realized that all this time, Kusanagi had been purposely withholding his strength while fighting. Now that the camera was destroyed, Kusanagi could fight without worrying about distractions like this. Kusanagi continued to deploy her bright magic in all directions to destroy one by one the monsters that filled the area in front of the academy. The other students continued to support Kusanagi by saying he would beat the monsters. The students were so fixated on the Kusanagi's fighting skills that they didn't notice that several monsters were approaching to attack them. Luckily, Inspector Shido quickly defeats the monster and says there must be something they can do to help Kusanagi. Sergeant Sanada agreed and immediately complied with his superior's order. Kusanagi saw that the police in this era weren't so bad either. Meanwhile, the demon leader monster screamed even more furiously when he saw that Kusanagi could annihilate his men. He immediately created several more magic circles to counter Kusanagi. Inspector Shido saw that the demon leader beast would be using level 6 magic that was on par with the magic of noble mages. The inspector was shocked and worried to see him. He was worried that they couldn't do anything to keep up with the magic of that level. The demon leader monster creates dragon flames with quite a lot of power. The dragon roared through the sky, creating terrible terror for all who saw it. The students, reporters, and even the police could only hug each other to brace themselves for the dragon's deadly attack. The students cried in fear. Sergeant Sarada hugged the female student by her side while silently praying for the protection of the gods. Inspector Shido believed that there was no way Kusanagi could beat that dragon beast no matter how strong he was. According to the inspector, there was no way for Kusanagi to win against the dragon. But that was not the case with Yuika's thoughts. This girl believed that Kusanagi could defeat the dragon. He instilled great hope and belief that Kusanagi could win. Meanwhile, Kusanagi was looking casually at the huge dragon in front of him. He knew the dragon was big, but he thought the dragon's movement was still slow, so he deduced that the demon captain forced himself to use level 6 magic power. Kusanagi realized that he would not win this fight if he only used level 2 magic power. Kusanagi didn't want to stand out, but he had to win to save everyone. So this young man immediately created several huge magic circles for the sake of creating an enormous blue snake. Yuika grinned at how powerful Kusanagi was and how positive the magic aura Kusanagi had, as if Kusanaga's presence created peace from the positive aura she created. The inspector was amazed to see a large water snake created from synthetic magic energy. The two incarnate magic serpents that were so powerful roared extremely loudly. Then they attacked each other as if the fire Sanaga belonging to the demon troop leader didn't want to lose against the water snake belonging to Kusanagi. The two huge snakes collided, biting, even coiling to crush each other. The demon army leader kept muttering to kill humans. He insisted on controlling his dragons by constantly saying he would slaughter the humans. The demon leader's fiery dragon roared with rage following his old resolve. But Kusanagi casually cast a spell to make the water dragon bite the fire dragon. Until finally the fire dragon lost and the water Sanaga lunged at the leader of the demon army. The demon asked how could a human win against him, but the question just evaporated along with the disappearance of the demon army leader's body. Kusanagi casually answered the monster's question by saying that this was because the demon beast leader lacked training in his magic skills. Kusanagi thought that the demon leader should be able to do better than this, but he didn't expect even the demon leader to be weakened like this. With the demon leader's life ending, sunlight shone again upon the academy. Kusanagi smiled, realizing that the calamity had passed because the boss had been defeated. For now, they can rest easy. The disciples were dumbfounded when they saw that their surroundings had brightened again. These students are wondering if they have won, and they are safe. Then when they realized that this victory was not just an illusion, the students immediately shouted and cheered with joy. Reporters who were shivering with fear can now smile with relief with teary eyes. They are happy to have survived this tragedy. So did Sergeant Sanada, who hugged the nearby female students while whispering with relief that they were now safe from the disaster. Even Inspector Shido could hardly believe that a student could defeat the demon army leader. Even for noble magicians, it would be very difficult to win against the demon leader. Inspector Shido so wondering who exactly is this young man who managed to defeat this monster. Finally, Inspector Shido fell to the ground as his legs lost the strength to the point where they couldn't support their weight. Kusanagi crouched down in front of Yuika and said that she had won against the captain of the demon army. Yuika replied that she had expected it because she believed in Kusanagi, not forgetting this girl to thank Kusanagi. After Kusanagi said "You're welcome," suddenly many academy students rushed to this young man. They flocked to thank Kusanagi and praised his prowess in fighting the monster. Kusanagi was annoyed because he was back to being as prominent as before. In his heart, this young man was a little worried about his future. Yuika, who saw Kusanagi's expression from a distance, noticed that the young man looked irritated. Finally, the reporter was able to report that the calamity at Kamui Magic Academy had been successfully stopped. The academy announced that they would not suppress information regarding students defeating demon bosses. There were no fatalities in this incident, but several people were injured. The academy students were excited as they watched this newscast on their cell phones, because the reporter repeatedly reported about Kusanagi's prowess. They suspect that Kusanagi will soon be promoted to S-class because of that ability. Suddenly, several female students approached Kusanagi. They unabashedly asked how Kusanagi could be so strong. They even asked if Kusanagi might have inherited the blood of a noble mage. In a corner of the classroom, a bespectacled student said Kusanagi was too arrogant for being spoiled, though he thought there was no way any academy student could be that strong. The students who were on Kusanagi's side pointed out the fact that in fact, the young man had managed to single-handedly defeat the captain of the demon army. They accused the bespectacled student of being jealous of Kusanagi. That's why he said no to Kusanagi. Even though the bespectacled student agreed that Kusanagi had indeed succeeded in defeating the captain of the demon army, but after he thought many times, it still seemed impossible. While the students in his class were busy arguing, Kusanagi sneaked out of the classroom quietly. As soon as he managed to escape from the people who were busy crowding him, Kusanagi could only feel relieved. Yuika, who suddenly appeared by his side, said that Kusanagi looked troubled. This young man immediately asked Yuika not to tease him at an annoying moment like this. Yuika says that this can't be helped because Kusanagi is a hero who saves everyone. Then Kusanagi asked if being promoted to S-class was also part of it. Yuika answered that getting into S-class seems to be because Kusanagi managed to escape the battle during Calamity. Kusanagi saw that Yuika didn't seem happy, but Yuika replied that she was happy, but there is someone in S-class who will make her uncomfortable later. Kusanagi then asked how was Ruka's condition. Yuika answered that her older sister was fine, and they talked more now. Yuika said it was all thanks to Kusanagi, so he thanked him very much for all that Kusanagi had done. But suddenly Kusanagi hit Yuika's head playfully, making the girl groan briefly and ask what does that mean. While walking away, Kusanagi says Yuika already thanked him yesterday, so she can stop saying it and not say it again and again. Yuika gave a small smile after hearing that from Kusanagi. Meanwhile, at the ministry building, the prime minister had hung up the special phone call he had just made. Then he said that with this the teleconference with other countries was over. Another higher-up said seeking help during the next disaster would be difficult, especially considering they already have a lot to deal with. Plus the talk about a student defeating a boss monster. The scene was so chaotic and most of the cops there were passed out that it's possible it was just a misunderstanding. The prime minister said the leaders of each country were also skeptical, but that was understandable. After all that, back in the wizarding nobility we need to hold a measurement conference to prepare for the next disaster. That afternoon on the rooftop, Ruka and Ryuji asked Kusanagi and Yuika to chat. Ruka's face looked very serious when she said she wanted to ask Kusanagi something important. Suddenly this long-haired girl asked Kusanagi to make herself her student. A few days later, Yuika and Ruka were sitting on the terrace of their house. Ruka says it seems Kusanagi has stopped the calamity. Yuika confirmed that and said it was the Kusanagi who had defeated the demon captain. He even used level 4 synthetic magic against the demon captain's dragon. Instantly Ruka was shocked to hear about synthetic magic level 4. Magic that even the highest ranked magicians couldn't use in this era. Yuika firmly said that what she said was the truth. Hearing and seeing the determination on Yuika's face made Ruka believe that what had happened must be true, because Ruka knows Yuika can't lie. Yuika asks why Ruka is so sure that she's not lying. The older sister answered because Yuika was an innocent child even before. She is an obedient child and never lies. Yuika is also a hard worker and gentle but serious, and Ruka thought someone with those qualifications shouldn't be a talented magician. but it seemed she was pushing herself too hard. Seeing the worry on her sister's face, Yuika immediately stood up and excitedly said she would get stronger. She also said that she would become strong enough to calm her elder sister down, that way Ruka could rest comfortably. Hearing her little sister's firm determination, Ruka smiled gently and said that Yuika had grown. At this point, Ruka realized that Kusanaga's strength was already beyond that of a student and it might have been even higher than her father's. So Ruka wants to ask Yuika for help with something. So here is Ruka now, standing on the rooftop floor thinking that if she continued like this, she would at most only become a high-class magician. To become stronger, which crushes Kusanagi's help. Finally, Ruka dropped all her pride and apologized to Kusanagi for all this time mocking and belittling him. She is truly sorry. Even though she knew that this apology sounded selfish, she would abandon her pride just for this. So Ruka lowered her head and begged Kusanagi to forgive her and accept her as a student. Kusanagi quickly complied with the request. Ruka was even surprised because her request was accepted too quickly. Kusanagi goes so far as to explain that he wants to accept Ruka as his student. Ruka asked why she will accept so. Kusanagi even thought Ruka was strange, because she asked for it. Ruka knew about it, but she had done many bad things to Kusanagi. Kusanagi casually said he forgave Ruka for apologizing, and he accepted Ruka as a student because she asked him to already. Just like that. Hearing this made Ruka even more shocked. Ryuji suddenly approached Kusanagi and said he also wanted to be Kusanaga's student. Casually too, this time Kusanagi said okay. It would be fine for him to teach another person or two. Hearing an answer like this made Ryuji even happier. Yuika explained to the still dumbfounded Ruka that that was just the way Kusanagi was. Ruka even thought that Kusanagi was a very mysterious figure. A while later, in the conference room, Kusanagi, along with Yuika, accompanied by their teacher, were sitting opposite the police. The male policeman introduced himself as Inspector Shido Shaogu of the Metropolitan Police Department's Beast Countermeasures Division. Meanwhile, the other is Sergeant Sanada Karin. First, they bowed to convey their thanks profusely to Kusanagi, because without his help, both civilians and the police might have been annihilated by monsters. Kusanagi replied politely that the two policemen had said their thanks constantly during the investigation, so he felt this was more than enough. Kusanagi asked if there was anything they needed now. Inspector Shido said that the investigation regarding the Calamity was over, but something caught their attention. Inspector Shido heard that Kusanaga's magic power awakened after he was involved in a traffic accident. The people around him also said the same thing, so there was no mistake. But there is one person who said that Kusanagi looks like a different person after the accident. His personality changed and his magic abnormally became enough to defeat one demon captain. Kusanagi looked relaxed at the depressing statement, but it was Yuika who looked taken aback instead. Yuika looked angry when she asked the policeman to hold back the meaning of his statement. And this girl immediately asked what the heck was that cop trying to say. Inspector Shido instead replaced the question with something that didn't discredit Kusanagi too much. The young inspector asked if Kusanagi knew anything about black magicians. Kusanagi and Yuika were both surprised to hear that. So the inspector immediately flashed a picture on his cell phone screen of a young wizard defeating beasts and helping people under the dim darkness of the night. Videos of that person have been widely circulated on the internet. So did the disciples in front of him not know about this video yet? Yuika asks what does that black magician figure have to do with Kusanagi. Inspector Shido answered quickly since the two of them were similar in both stature and age. The black magician chart is rated as a moderately strong wizard, because almost no one in that age range could use that much magic. Not to mention that the period when he started rescue activities was close to the day Kusanagi was discharged from the hospital. It is illegal to use magic in this town without a permit or qualification. If the dark magician was indeed a student of this academy, then the police would leave it to the school's discretion to some extent. But because this black magician had garnered a lot of publicity, the police had no other choice but to take action. And expulsion alone would not be enough for him. But if Kusanagi was willing to admit that it was him, then the police would reduce the sentence as best they could. So the inspector asked Kusanagi to answer carefully. Is it true that he is a black magician? Casually and quickly Kusanagi answered it wasn't him. Inspector Shido immediately smiled at that answer, and he was happy that it was true that the black magician wasn't Kusanagi. The inspector immediately said goodbye. He didn't forget to thank them for welcoming them so well. They will end the question and answer session for the day. While walking down the hall, Inspector Shido noticed that Kusanagi didn't even look the least bit flustered. It would take a lot of courage if he was a dark magician. From here, the inspector realized that Kusanagi was not like an ordinary high school student. There must be something different about him. Meanwhile, Sergeant Sanada realizes that Kusanagi is the black magician, because he still remembers very well the aura and voice of the two of them, which are very similar. The sergeant thought Kusanaga's actions at night must be purely to save people. She couldn't tell this to her senior, Inspector Shido, because this could be counted as a failure for a policeman, but Kusanagi was the one who had saved him, so the sergeant felt he owed him his life. While Inspector Shido was thinking of quickly investigating Kusanaga's identity, the subordinate, Sergeant Sanada, was thinking of immediately hiding Kusanaga's true identity. Right now Kusanagi and Yuika have been transferred to the S-class. They are standing in front of the class to be introduced to other students. Even in this class, Kusanagi was immediately approached by male students who were curious whether he managed to defeat the demon captain, while Yuika was immediately surrounded by students who were curious about what it was like to be a noble mage. The teacher even had to force his students to sit down immediately because they were busy crowding Kusanagi and Yuika. Now Kusanagi walked down the hall while massaging his dizzy head. He was bombarded with questions until break time. This was what made Kusanagi not want to stand out. Suddenly, a beautiful girl with red hair and braids called out to Kusanagi shyly. She said softly to ask Kusanagi for a bit of time. Finally, the two of them were now standing on the roof again. Kusanagi wondered inside his head if it was customary to ask people up to the roof when they wanted to talk about something or something. Yuika had been thinking about getting solo training. Instead, she saw Kusanagi on the roof with a girl. Because she already knew, Yuika peeked from behind the wall and eavesdropped on their conversation. The red-haired girl asked if Kusanagi remembered her. Kusanagi answered honestly that he didn't remember the girl. With an embarrassed face, the girl said that she had been saved by Kusanagi during the calamity. Only then did Kusanagi seem to remember this girl. Should this red-hair girl add during practical class she was also attacked by monsters, and someone helped her using a very unique bright-colored magic. This girl believes that magic comes from the power of Kusanagi. After a good look, Kusanagi was now sure who this girl was. Then with a red face, this girl thanked Kusanagi for saving her twice. Kusanagi tried that it wasn't necessary as he was just doing what he could. Hearing that, the girl lowered her head with a shy smile as she said Kusanagi was really cool. Yuika, who was standing quite far away, was annoyed that she couldn't hear their conversation clearly. Yuika could only wonder inside her head what are they talking about. Suddenly the red-haired girl said that she liked Kusanagi and asked him out on a date. Instantly, Yuika, who was standing behind the wall, was shocked to hear such a loud confession. The red-haired girl added she really doesn't have any good but she will do her best. So she asked Kusanagi to be his girlfriend. Kusanagi thanked the girl for liking him, but then gently apologizes that he doesn't have time to date someone. Kusanagi explained honestly there are many things to do. The mysterious red-haired girl lowered her head and said that she understood, then smiled and thanked Kusanagi for directly rejecting, because then this girl could give up on Kusanagi now. Satisfied with saying what she wanted to say, the red-haired girl walked away with tears running down her face. Kusanagi suddenly said, "How about Yuika stop hiding and come out now?" Hearing that made Yuika startled and shyly came out of her hiding place, saying that she felt had hidden her mana well. Kusanagi replied that Yuika's mana control is really terrible, because her mana was scattered in all directions. Kusanagi says this is the second time Yuika has eavesdropped and it's become a good habit. So Kusanagi asked if Yuika really likes peeking or something. Yuika was shocked and firmly said that it was just a coincidence. It's not like Yuika wants to actually hear about Kusanaga's problems. But in the end, Yuika asked why Kusanagi rejected the girl's feelings. The girl was pretty cute though. Kusanagi replied he didn't plan to date anyone. This young man thought his age was too much different from the children of today, regardless of the physical term or age, so he doesn't think it suits him. Yuika understood that, so she asked one more time if it was true that Kusanagi didn't want to date anyone. Yuika wondered in her heart why did she feel so relieved when she heard about Kusanagi's decision not to want to date anyone. The two of them finally got off the rooftop. Yuika, who stepped behind Kusanagi, looked at him with sad eyes, but Kusanagi suddenly looked back and asked them to practice their mana control well, because according to him, Yuika really clearly lacked training. Yuika looked away and firmly said that she also knew about it. Yuika promised in her heart that she would work hard and become strong until the day Kusanagi would admit it. At night, Kusanagi again went to the abandoned city to hunt monsters. This youth noticed the number of monsters did not decrease even after the calamity ended. So Kusanagi was wondering if this was a sign that another calamity was coming again. Suddenly, from another corner of the city came a girl's voice asking for help. Apparently, she was being chased by a thug using his magic powers. The thug said to keep the girl screaming and asking for help, so there was no way anyone around here at this time of night would come to her aid. But that assumption was soon broken when suddenly Kusanagi stood right in front of the thug and instantly beat them with one strike. Kusanagi saw the man as an amateur and a criminal, superb melee combat skills but shouldn't get used to fighting other magicians. The victim, who was a girl, thanked Kusanagi. She then asked if the young man was a black magician who was going viral. When the girl wanted to ask more, suddenly Kusanagi jumped away. While floating above the night sky, Kusanagi thought that the nicknames of black magicians given by the students in Shido seemed to have been given to him on purpose. But he wondered why did this nickname become so popular. Finally, during lunchtime, Kusanagi, who was hanging out with Yuika, Ruka, and Ryuji on the rooftop, asked the three of them about the black magician. Kusanagi said Shido mentioned that matter before, about an amateur broadcaster acting during the night or something. People were also talking about it, so he started to wonder why that figure was so popular. Ryuji replied that maybe this topic is very popular on the internet. Kusanagi then asked what was the meaning of the internet. Instantly, three people by his side whispered to each other and shook their heads confused at Kusanagi's question. They suspect Kusanagi is a figure who lacks knowledge, even though in this day and age it doesn't make sense to someone who doesn't know what the internet is. They knew that Kusanagi had been ostracized from society, but who would have thought he would be this bad? Yuika explained that the internet is an information network that reaches the whole world. People can find anything there, so the information travels like lightning. The internet usually also included photos or videos, so almost all of them are there. Kusanagi tried to understand it. Ryuji approached Kusanagi and said that the young man could find information on his cell phone. When Kusanagi took out his mobile device, Yuika and Ryuji were busy teaching this young man how to use internet applications. Kusanagi suddenly smiled brightly as he successfully connected to the internet. Yuika, Ryuji, and even Ruka clapped as Kusanagi did it. They were happy now that Kusanagi could use the internet like all of them. Ruka says that Kusanagi should help them train, so this girl was asking when they would start training. Kusanagi replied excitedly that they would start their practice after school today, because they had taught Kusanagi how to use the smartphone and everything in it. This young man promised to do his best to train the three of them. Ruka and Ryuji looked happy hearing this, but Yuika looked worried and had a bad feeling about this. Yuika's hunch was right. The three of them ended up exhausted from the very hard training. Kusanagi, who was still standing casually, said they haven't even started to warm up yet. So this young man asked the three of them to act like their lives depended on the training this time. Yuika excitedly stood back up with a tired body and said she could still continue. Ruka refused to be belittled like that. Likewise, Ryuji will show how stubborn he is. Kusanagi smiled happily seeing the enthusiasm of the three of them. Then Kusanagi asked the three of them to attack him now. With that, the three of them attacked Kusanagi again in this training. Meanwhile, near the abandoned Tokyo Tower, two journalists were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. Even the two of them couldn't believe it considering the situation looked normal just a moment ago. The body of one of the journalists was even shaking and he couldn't blink his eyes when he asked what really happened in this place. In the city that has been damaged, a lot of terrible monsters appear. Even a monster captain who is so strong appears again. The three of them looked exhausted after practicing until the afternoon with Kusanagi. Even so, Kusanagi still casually stood up and asked if they had given up. Ruka with all her might rose to her strength, shouting that she still didn't give up. Ryuji didn't want to be outdone by Ruka and exerted as much power as he could. But in the end, they both got hit by a small attack from Kusanagi right on their head. Ryuji even shouted that the attack on his head hurt a lot. Yuika jumped from behind Kusanagi and shouted that the youth opened wide. But Kusanagi quickly dodged Yuika's attack while answering no. With that, Kusanagi immediately attacked Yuika's forehead, causing her to scream in pain, and finally fell down exhausted. Kusanagi said now it's time to rest. The three of them drank while wiping the sweat that was so profusely flooding their faces. Ruka, Yuika, and Ryuji looked very tired in contrast to Kusanagi, who still looked relaxed. Ryuji said, "Isn't Kusanagi too strong for a student?" Ruka added up to this point as the top students in the academy couldn't fight Kusanagi. Yuika added Kusanagi was definitely on a completely different level from the students at the academy. Kusanagi immediately put on his usual exasperated look the moment people started talking about his strength. And Yuika knew that expression very well. Kusanagi explained that he had almost died in a traffic accident, so he got this power the moment he regained consciousness. Kusanagi didn't know the reason, so she asked the three of them to stop asking. Ruka says that it was the near-death experience that was the cause of the awakening of the Kusanagi powers. Ryuji replied that it was possible. Kusanagi smiled in relief, thinking they were so predictable with just such an excuse. Yuika noticed Kusanaga's happy expression after he managed to trick the three people in front of him. But Yuika guessed that Kusanagi must have had a reason for not telling the truth. Since he was trying so hard to hide it, it might be better not to dig deeper into the reason. Kusanagi thought the three of them were too predictable and tricked. Finally, Kusanagi walks home with Ryuji. On the way, Ryuji said it was a really fun practice session. Kusanagi commented that the youth by his side was very tough. Ryuji replied that it was because he was training himself all this time. But Ryuji suddenly said he was hungry. Now he has to go home and cook some food for some horrible people. Kusanagi was surprised to hear that Ryuji could cook. With an innocent face, Kusanagi asked if it was true that Ryuji could cook with that appearance. Ryuji was annoyed and asked if Kusanagi had been eating out all this time. Kusanagi casually replied that he usually eats noodles at home. Ryuji was even more surprised to hear that, so he asked if that was all Kusanagi ate. Kusanagi confirmed that while saying the world really has become very easy now. Ryuji immediately held Kusanagi's shoulder and said his body wouldn't survive if he continued to do unhealthy eating habits like that. So Ryuji swiftly invited Kusanagi to go to his house and make some food. Kusanagi stuttered as he said it was unnecessary, but Ryuji insisted that this matter had already been decided. Ryuji forced Kusanagi to come to his house no matter what. Kusanagi smiled and thought this guy was really pushy. As soon as he arrived at Ryuji's house, Kusanagi immediately became a baby sister to his 3 younger siblings. Ryuji, who had just emerged from the kitchen with an apron on, apologized because he had to look after his 3 younger siblings. Kusanagi answered Ryuji not to worry, but Ryuji instead screamed full of worry. Kusanagi guarded the child by using magic in the room. Ryuji irritably says he's never heard of anyone using magic while playing, but he thought it was unexpected when he saw that Kusanagi was so good at looking after children. Kusanagi remembered the tragedy of his previous life. At that time, many children were crying and suffering on the street because they lost their parents in the middle of a terrible tragedy. So Kusanagi answered seriously that children are precious. Hearing that, Ryuji even said that Kusanagi sounded like an old man just now. An annoyed Kusanagi asked Ryuji to be quiet. While Ryuji was busy preparing dinner, Kusanagi went back to playing with the children, until finally it was time for them all to gather at a round dining table to eat together. The children looked very hungry while eating. Kusanagi was also dumbfounded when he tasted the delicious result of the cooking. It had been some time since he had eaten home-cooked food. All this time Kusanagi was too busy fighting for a long time that he neglected himself. Kusanagi suddenly asked where Ryuji's parents were, because earlier he had not seen any adults in the house apart from Ryuji. While wiping the mouth of one of his younger siblings, Ryuji said that he no longer had a father and his mother had to work late into the night. So Ryuji did the housework and looked after the kids instead. He even has a part-time job in his spare time. Kusanagi commented that Ryuji seems like a slightly preoccupied figure. With a big smile, Ryuji said that this was hard but he didn't hate it. Kusanagi smiled because he understood what the young man in front of him meant. Kusanagi added that oftentimes someone would be more excited if something was more difficult. This is where Kusanagi thought Ryuji was indeed a stubborn figure. That night, Kusanagi ends up staying over at Ryuji's house. He even shared a blanket with Ryuji's younger siblings, making Ryuji apologize for making Kusanagi stay the night at the request of his younger siblings. Kusanagi answered not to worry, because according to him it's not so bad when you do it just once in a while. Ryuji thanked him once again for Kusanaga's attitude. Hearing this, Kusanagi replied that he had done nothing worthy of Ryuji's gratitude. Ryuji quickly said thanks to Ruka. Ryuji explained that Ruka had become much happier than before, and Ryuji believed all of that was thanks to Kusanagi. Hearing this, Kusanagi thought the two of them must be having some sort of romance. So Kusanagi asked if Ryuji likes Ruka. Ryuji replied that it was impossible between him and Ruka. The two of them weren't compatible with each other, so naturally they stuck with each other. That is it. Kusanagi realized that it was like he had a mismatch with someone. The next day, Kusanagi and Ryuji went walking to school together. Ruka and Yuika were already waiting for these two youths with jealous faces. Yuika said they were both late. Ryuji gave an excuse by saying that Kusanagi didn't want to wake up. Yuika was shocked and immediately asked if the two of them slept together. Ruka immediately suspected that Ryuji was secretly taking Kusanaga's special training behind their backs. While the three of them were arguing, Kusanagi thought about how they could meet them naturally. Kusanagi didn't think much of this either, but suddenly Inspector Shido and Sergeant Sanada appeared asking Kusanagi for a moment. Kusanagi sighed heavily looking at the two of them again. Sergeant Sanada apologizes for constantly bothering Kusanagi. The problem is that this time they have very urgent business. Sergeant Sanada explains the abnormal appearance of the beasts around Tokyo Tower. There is a possibility that this is related to Calamity, so the two of them had come to request cooperation with Kusanagi Minato. Kusanagi replied reluctantly that he was only an apprentice. Inspector Shido said Kusanagi was able to overcome a calamity on his own, so he wasn't fit to be categorized as an ordinary student. Honestly, the monsters were too much for the police to handle. Kusanagi instead asked if it was okay for a police officer to say something like that. Inspector Shido confirmed that this showed how far they had been cornered. So with all his heart, Inspector Shido asked Kusanagi to cooperate with them in cleaning up the monster. Kusanagi finally replied he would lend him his strength. The inspector was pleased to hear this. Kusanagi thought he wanted to avoid standing out too much but apparently couldn't do that, because the situation does not allow those who do that. Inspector Shido said that Kusanagi would certainly be properly compensated for his services, so he asked Kusanagi to take it easy because they would contact the academy. Yuika, Ruka, and Ryuji said that they would help and support Kusanagi from behind. Inspector Shido said he was very grateful for the goodwill of the three of them, but he thought it was impossible for the three of them to help the police team now. Ruka insisted on helping by saying that they were top-level kids in the academy. Inspector Shido asked emphatically they are only the highest level in the academy, right? What they need and they talk about is the level of real combat. Inspector Shido even asked the three if their power level was on par with Kusanaga's. Hearing this, the three of them immediately silent with disappointed faces. Inspector Shido asked Ruka, Yuika, and Ryuji to just return to the academy. Meanwhile, Kusanagi had to leave immediately with the inspector. Before leaving, Kusanagi smiled at the three of them and said that the three of them must immediately catch up with Kusanagi to this point. Hearing that, the three of them could turn around and smile, saying of course they would soon catch up to Kusanagi's level. Now Kusanagi has to attend a meeting at the police station first. The police chief said there were many beasts that appeared around the Tokyo Tower. They needed to prepare countermeasures before the monsters harmed civilians. The leader said his party had asked for the cooperation of the students who played an active role during the calamity that occurred at the academy a few days ago. So the old man whose hair had turned white asked Kusanagi to stand up immediately. The other police officers were annoyed to see that there were children among them. They whispered to each other and sneered at Kusanagi openly. He thought the rumors about Kusanagi clearing up the calamity were just nonsense. Inspector Shido held the microphone and firmly said that Kusanagi Minato was the student who stopped the calamity at Kamui Academy. Inspector Shido admitted that he had seen the incident himself, and according to him, only a few people have power comparable to Kusanagi. Inspector Shido added that Kusanagi was the one involved in the calamity that happened again after so many centuries. So Inspector Shido believes cooperating with Kusanagi is a must. Inspector Shido asked his colleagues to treat Kusanagi as a fellow collaborator and not a normal high school boy. Even though Inspector Shido had said that still, many other police officers sneered at Kusanagi for being a normal high school boy. They thought that Kusanagi was just a kid who was too fussy among professionals. The leader even insists they have to do their best even if outsiders enter the group. They had to exterminate the beasts immediately, so this middle-aged leader had his entire army return to their respective positions. After all the members left, Inspector Shido approached Kusanagi and apologized for the behavior of his comrades. Kusanagi replied that it was okay because he understood that his presence would definitely put the other police officers in a bad mood. Inspector Shido commented that Kusanagi was very mature, in contrast to Sergeant Sanada, who was currently in tears and couldn't hold back her sadness. Sergeant Sanada explained that she was too afraid to answer the people's harsh words. Kusanagi asked Sergeant Sanada not to think too much about it because Kusanagi himself didn't really care what they thought. Sergeant Sanada immediately thought that Kusanagi was a very mature figure. While in the car, Kusanagi asked Inspector Shido what the estimated combat power of the beasts would be. Inspector Shido answered roughly 80 magicians. Almost all of them are middle rank and only some are at a high level. Intermediate level magicians can only use level 2 magic while high ranks can use level 3 magic. Inspector Shido said his request might sound embarrassing, but since Kusanagi could use synthetic magic level 4, he was the only strong one in the group. And his plan in a battle beyond that would be a pure magic battle couldn't really be called a battle plan. Kusanagi thought the plan wouldn't matter if it was just an army of demons and magical beasts. But beings who are in a higher realm than the Ibis captain have higher intelligence as well, so they need countermeasures for that. After all, a direct battle couldn't be called a strategy. Kusanagi said it didn't seem like there was any equipment judging from what he had seen so far. Inspector Shido answered because there really isn't any tool that can fight magic and beasts. So cops often go into battle wearing clothes that are easy to move around in. Kusanagi asked once again if there was a tool that had been used as an anti-beast. Inspector Shido replied that it existed, but right now it is rare because there is nothing left, only nobles have it. Kusanagi was surprised to hear that. Whereas in the past there were lots of tools that could be used to fight beasts. Kusanagi is aware of the decline in the magic power of magicians, but what exactly has happened over the past 50 years? Why don't even the tools to fight beasts exist? Finally, they all arrived at the watchtower near the collapsed Tokyo Tower. From the top of the rooftop, Kusanagi saw the calamity did occur, but the number of monsters was abnormal. This young man was wondering what exactly was going on here. The police panicked at the sight of so many monsters. They asked whether these few humans would really fight against that many monsters, because according to them the number of monsters was more than reported. These cops are protesting. because there's even a demon captain there. They obviously wouldn't be able to win against that demon captain. These policemen proposed to just ask for help from private organizations or magician nobles. Inspector Shidu replied that his side had asked for support from private organizations and noble broadcasters, but they didn't come here just like that. Meanwhile, there is an increasing number of illegal beasts and magicians all over the city, so they are quite busy recently. The cops started to get noisy, realizing they had to fight that many monsters alone. It was as if they were being asked to kill themselves. Inspector Shidu asked Kusanagi if he could defeat those monsters. Kusanagi casually replied he could do it. Instantly, another police officer snapped at this young man and asked him to stop joking, as well as asking Kusanagi to stop being so arrogant. Kusanagi ignored the noisy group of people. Do not notice there is something strange about the movement of the monsters. The group of monsters raised their hands up to the sky, turning angry, and Calamity appeared again. Is heard, and an urgent message from head office to all police is heard. Apparently, Calamity happened all over the country. The notice was repeated several times that Calamity had occurred across the country, so saving the residents is the top priority, and Calamity's countermeasures were urgently needed. Since headquarters would prioritize dealing with Calamity in the city, there would be no assistance coming from other areas. Hearing this, it was clear that all the police on the rooftop became increasingly tense. The cops were asking each other what they should do if the Calamity happened again. While Kusanagi realized that Calamity was something that happened naturally, but the beasts just now seemed to be the cause of this happening. By what time had they now found a way to cause Calamity? The police pressed Inspector Shidu even more by saying that it was impossible for them to defeat this many monsters without some other assistance. While everyone was panicking, Kusanagi noticed the monsters were moving. Instantly, the police increasingly panicked seeing the monsters moving towards the city, because they realized at this point the monsters would harm the townspeople. They had no other way to prevent monsters other than fighting back, but that would be tantamount to suicide. While the policemen were panicking about this matter, Kusanagi suddenly casually said that the policemen of this era were terrible. Hearing that, it was obvious that the police were getting panicked, angry, and even cursed at Kusanagi. They still insisted there was no way to defeat that many beasts. But Kusanagi jumped from the rooftop right in the middle of a herd of monsters. With a confident smile, he said they could beat him. Kusanagi's appearance made the monsters roar with anger. The police panicked even more seeing how crazy Kusanagi was. They crowded and told the young man to run away immediately. But Kusanagi instead immediately uses magic level 3, which is called Wind Cutter, to attack all the beasts around it. Instantly, the police were amazed at how great Kusanagi was in defeating the monsters in front of him. In no time, the corpses of monsters scattered around Kusanagi. The demon soldiers who saw that did not accept it. They immediately created a magic circle to fight Kusanagi. But as soon as the attack was released, Kusanagi stood relaxed without any intention of fighting back. Because this young man knows the magic shield he has seems to be enough to protect him from the monsters' attacks. Since there were a lot of outsiders, this young man started to think of a precaution by creating a magic barrier like the one he had. After that, Kusanagi casually counterattacked the demon soldiers. Inspector Shidu thought that this young man was extraordinary, because Kusanagi can use various kinds of magic attributes casually. As Inspector Shidu had expected, only Kusanagi could get rid of this calamity. Inspector Shidu immediately sent his troops to follow Kusanagi against the monsters. Sergeant Sanada didn't even want to lose to try to fight back. The other police officers were trembling with fear, but they were determined not to run away and continue to be scared like this. As a result, they flocked to follow Kusanagi's steps to fight the monsters they could fight. Kusanagi saw the policemen's actions and smiled, seeing that they were quite capable of handling several monster beasts. Suddenly, someone shouted that the demon captain had appeared. They cursed because they realized that their strength was no match for that demon captain. These cops said only a legendary level magician could defeat the demon captain. Just as the police finished speaking, the demon captain was immediately eaten by the Kusanaga's water dragon. Casually, while maintaining the water dragon's magic circle, Kusanagi said he would take care of the demon captain. So the rest he left to the police. Seeing how Kusanagi defeated the monster, even creating a big hole in the ground, made the police stunned and recognized Kusanagi as a great magician. Inspector Shidu said they have to keep beating the beasts until the boss appears. The inspector also added they have a Kusanagi that will defeat the demon captain or anything stronger than that. While fighting, Kusanagi remembered, 60 years ago, a global level of calamity appeared. The first calamity for mankind. After that, the calamity started happening again and again, destroying this world slowly. Kusanagi is worried that what happened 60 years ago is repeating itself, that such a calamity would spread throughout the world. But Ichikami Minato was also in this period in Kusanagi form, so he wouldn't let those monsters exterminate humanity. One monster captain approaches Sergeant Sanada, who is unable to fight back. Luckily, Kusanagi managed to defeat the monster in time with his fire magic. When Kusanagi stood before her to save Sergeant Sanada, this mature woman realized that Kusanagi's aura was exactly the same as that night, when Kusanagi saved him from a monster in the old town. Kusanagi then turned around and helped Sergeant Sanada up while asking if she was okay. Sergeant Sanada stammered that she was fine. Not forgetting, he thanked Kusanagi. Kusanagi noticed this incident the same as it had back then in the old town. Kusanagi was wondering inside his head if Sergeant Sanada would notice. Sergeant Sanada apparently realized that it was Kusanagi. She wondered why Kusanagi chose to become a black magician. The sergeant also thought, how could Kusanagi be that strong? Sergeant Sanada knew that Kusanagi would hate him if he asked this. On the other hand, Kusanagi is still a student. So Sergeant Sanada shook her head vigorously to get rid of mixed thoughts. While preoccupied with his own thoughts, Sergeant Sanada didn't realize that a monster beast was about to attack him. Luckily, Kusanagi was just in time to come to catch the body of the sergeant, who almost fell. At the same time, fend off the attacks of the monster beast. While catching Sergeant Sanada's body, Kusanagi said it was close and very dangerous. Sergeant Sanada apologizes for bothering Kusanagi again. After this very dangerous incident, Kusanagi asked the sergeant to always be by his side, because Kusanagi realized Sergeant Sanada couldn't fight. Sergeant Sanada complied with Kusanagi's request with a red face. While staring at Kusanaga's busy fighting back, Sergeant Sanada wondered if Kusanagi was really just a student, because his attitude looks more mature even when compared to Sergeant Sanada herself. Suddenly, all the cops who had been attacking the monsters stopped. They were tense so that their bodies did not stop trembling as they felt a dark aura that was so terrible that it seemed to create terror in them. Apparently, this is one of the signs before the appearance of a very strong monster. The monster roared so loudly that it made everyone who saw it even more tense. Inspector Shido knew it was a subspecies monster of the demon captain. Inspector Shido asked in surprise why such a high-level monster could appear here now. The police fell to the ground with limp bodies. They paled at the sight of such a formidable monster. These cops believed it would be impossible for them to defeat such a powerful monster. Even they suspected that it was impossible for noble magicians to win against such powerful monsters. Right at that moment, Kusanagi came forward to attack the boss monster. The police tried to prevent Kusanagi for fear that Kusanagi would not win no matter how strong he was. But with full confidence, Kusanagi turned around and said that he could definitely win. The police were surprised to hear Kusanagi's answer. However, a moment later, one of them realized that his body had stopped shaking. Sergeant Sanada with a panic face prays wholeheartedly for Kusanagi to win. Inspector Shido smiled as Kusanagi boldly stepped up against the boss monster. This inspector believes Kusanagi has higher powers than noble magicians, so Kusanagi might be able to win against that boss monster. That's what the inspector said. He hoped that Kusanagi would show his true power to himself and the other cops. Inspector Shido asked all of his members to continue using their maximum power until the boss monster was defeated. Now they immediately carried out the captain's orders. Meanwhile, Kusanagi and the boss monster faced each other. Amidst the commotion that was going on around them, the two of them stood still waiting for the other to attack. Until finally the boss monster attacked with a large fireball that Kusanagi could easily avoid. The fireball exploded behind the crowd. The police who saw the first level attack from the monster immediately tensed up again. They were astonished when they saw for themselves how strong the monster was. But Kusanagi casually brushed off the dust on his shoulders, as if the monster's attack in front of him was no big deal. The monster asked in wonder what Kusanagi was, because he looks very relaxed and not affected at all by the monster's attacks. Kusanagi answered casually, guys, he's just an ordinary student, that's all. The monster was even more surprised by Kusanagi's answer, because he could see which energy was enormous from within Kusanaga's body. That way the boss monster immediately created many magic circles and said that he had to kill the strong human, Kusanagi. Instantly a fire dragon monster roared and charged toward Kusanagi. The policemen who saw the high level 6 magic were dumbfounded in fear. They said there was no way Kusanagi could win. Kusanagi thought even if he could dodge the attack or directly attack it, the rest of the guys would be trapped. So in a moment of urgency like that, Kusanagi thought, what should he do? Suddenly all the monsters, even the beasts, created a magic circle to attack Kusanagi together. Inspector Shido thought this was impossible. Seeing that the situation was getting tense, the police asked Kusanagi to run immediately. But Kusanagi still casually stood where he was, even though dozens of magic attacks were directed at him by the monsters. Until finally a water storm appeared and dispelled the fire dragon's attack on Kusanagi. Meanwhile, attacks from beasts can be blocked with Kusanagi's protective barrier. After all the attacks were gone, Kusanagi casually asked the boss monster if the attack was over. Seeing Kusanagi still standing nonchalantly, Inspector Shido and Sergeant Sanada asked what just happened. Inspector Shido couldn't even believe it, even though the incident just now happened right in front of his eyes. According to him, Only noble magicians could do level 6 magic so far. It was a high-level technique equivalent to remote activation. And what's more surprising is, Kusanagi can use 2 types of magic at the same time. Usually, a wizard can only use his magic once, and it took a while before using a different type of water. But Kusanagi uses 2 kinds of magic at almost the same time. One type of magic is already too powerful, let alone using more than one type of magic simultaneously. Inspector Shido said the Kusanagi might be stronger than the noble magicians. At this point, Inspector Shido realized that his intuition was not wrong. Kusanagi was the person he was looking for, to become the second Ichikami Minato. The boss monster screamed as it charged toward Kusanagi, but Kusanagi casually said that the place where they were fighting at this time was too stuffy, so he asked the boss monster to move. With Ariel's level 1 teleportation magic, the 2 of them moved and floated above the sky. Kusanagi suspected that the boss monster could use aerial magic well, because he didn't flinch as he stood on the magic circle that was floating tens of kilometers above the ground. After the 2 of them stood in the sky, Kusanagi said she didn't care about the clumsy monster alliance. Now he no longer needed to hold back when fighting. The boss monster immediately lunged at Kusanagi. He tried several times to attack Kusanagi, but this young man always managed to avoid it, until finally Kusanagi was beaten back and the monster attacked with his fire skill. When Kusanagi covered his head with his arms, the monster suddenly was above Kusanagi and fell to the ground. The monster waited long enough until he finally saw that Kusanagi was still able to get up again after being hit so badly. The monster was angry and screamed how could Kusanagi still be able to stand up. Kusanagi flew back up to the front of the monster. Then Kusanagi said since it seemed like a waste to use magic, the best choice would be with bare hands. But Kusanagi still said it would be useless because the monster wouldn't be able to attack him. Kusanagi used his best shot to attack the monster and knocked it back several meters. The monster was surprised after being able to balance the body again. He wondered how a normal human punch could make him fall back this far. Before the shock was over, the monster cursed again and asked where the damn boy Kusanagi came from. Kusanagi casually answered if he thought only the monster could use magic. Then Kusanagi will show his technique. Immediately Kusanaga's aura turned into a very beautiful gradation of rainbow colors. Even the boss monster thought the magic power emitting from Kusanagi's body was great. Inspector Shido, who was still standing on the ground, wondered what was this, because he could feel something very unsettling rising right up from above them all. Kusanaga's magic energy is getting stronger as the owner's determination is getting bigger. With full confidence, he set the stance to prepare to face his opponent. The monster loudly said even if Kusanagi protected herself with attack magic, a human would be useless against him. Kusanagi jumped at the monster as he said he would try to show off his abilities. With that, Kusanagi immediately hit the center of the monster's body. Even though he had tried to block Kusanagi's attack, the attack that was so fast from Kusanagi made the monster roar full of anger. Inspector Shido, who was observing the fight from below, noticed Kusanagi had managed to overwhelm the demon boss in a point-blank fight. He even wondered how a human's fist could fight such a monster. Not only that, Kusanagi could even injure the boss demon with just a punch. Now, the boss monster's body was battered. He slowly asked why human attacks managed to hurt him. Kusanagi explained that normal attacks and weapons were useless against monsters, but not only when using enough magic. Attacking while protecting oneself with magic, a fusion of magic and martial arts, is a magic martial art that Kusanagi created herself. The boss demon was furious as he said he would never spare a mere human who could defeat him. He quickly slid towards Kusanagi to counterattack, but in the end, he was hit by Kusanagi's punch, which was strong enough right in the middle of his stomach. The blow was so powerful that it made a hole in the demon boss' stomach and he fell unconscious to the ground. With the boss demon's life ending, sunlight returned, and Calamity ended. Even so, Inspector Shido still asked all his members not to let their guard down because there were still some monsters left. Kusanagi smiled as he thought he'd better leave the rest to the police. Kusanagi momentarily paused above the sky when she saw this beautiful sight. He said it had been a long time since he used magic martial arts, so Kusanagi felt his body a little stiff. When Kusanagi finally landed back on the ground, the policeman had already stood up to greet him. Then Inspector Shido loudly thanked Kusanagi for the hard work in defeating the Calamity boss. Inspector Shido, representing the entire police force, expressed his gratitude for Kusanagi's hard work. Then they paid their respects to Kusanagi Minato, who had become a hero for them. From that day on, Calamity occurred in all parts of the world. Thanks to the contributions from the police and noble magicians, it was reported that the Calamity had ended. The unrest towards the Calamity, the criticism towards the government and the police, the expectations and disillusionment of noble magicians, along with the society's growing unrest. Someone said this. They said they had hope as long as they had the Black Mage, a new character that they expect will save them when the monsters attack. On the internet, people are busy discussing this black mage. Meanwhile, Kusanagi looks even more annoyed because more and more students are flocking to him and asking questions about whether Kusanagi stopped Calamity. Kusanagi thought this situation was very troublesome. Luckily, they stopped bothering Kusanagi when class finally started. The teacher who stood in front of the class said that today they would discuss the recent calamity. They are only students, but they are also magicians. There is a possibility that they will be summoned, so remember to always be ready, the teacher ordered. Even if they have experienced students, other children should also prepare themselves. All students immediately looked at Kusanagi when the teacher discussed the most talented student among them. Suddenly, Sergeant Sanada opened the door and didn't apologize for interrupting study time. The teacher frantically asked what was wrong with them barging in like this. Sergeant Sanada immediately said that they needed Kusanagi's help again. Seeing this attitude of the police, Kusanagi thought they didn't care about his image anymore. They had no self-esteem for barging in to ask a student for help. Kusanagi became even more uncomfortable because he was still full of admiration for his classmate. Finally, Kusanagi walked out of the classroom and asked Sergeant Sanada what was the situation. Before explaining, Sergeant Sanada said Kusanagi would get an award and credits. Besides the calamity, monsters have appeared all over the world. Illegal magicians and underground organizations were also more active than usual, so the police were severely understaffed. Kusanagi guessed that was the reason why the police came to him again. Sergeant Sanada looks very apologetic as he apologizes for always asking Kusanagi for help. But there wasn't anyone as strong as the Kusanagi against monsters. Kusanagi said next time the police could contact him by a cell phone, so Kusanagi gave his contact info to Sergeant Sanada. After that, Kusanagi asked what he should do. Sergeant Sanada explains that the police want to ask for Kusanagi's help to defeat the monsters that appear in Harajuku. Then the sergeant similarly said they would go together by car. But according to Kusanagi, it was too slow because he could go straight ahead with his magic power. Meanwhile, in the abandoned city of Harajuku, many children are crying without their parents. The younger brother shook with fear when he asked for protection from his older brother. Meanwhile, his older brother, who is still small, tried to be brave. While hugging his sister, he said he would protect his sister no matter what. Actually, what's wrong with this city? And what kind of monstrous creature intends to hurt these two innocent and helpless boys? Well, that's all for this discussion. We'll end the magic level manhwa here first because the comic is continuing. So if many chapters have been released, we will discuss them soon.